All right. I hope everyone can hear me well. Welcome, DART friends and colleagues. My name is Andrea Pesci. I'm going to host you today. I work at UC Santa Cruz, Director of Industry Alliances and Licensing, and I'm a proud member of the DART board. Wow, yesterday was awesome. Admiral Rondeau kicked off the day to inspire us not only in the theme of security, but also on thinking about the regional assets we have here, both physical and intellectual, and what makes the Monterey Bay a special place for the DART ecosystem to grow. We heard from some really incredible people across all the panels, including from the National Security Innovation Network, Ensign, the team there, Jesse and Matt, about enabling commercialization and unlocking impact of DoD research. We also had a surprise guest, Congressman Panetta. He joined us via video in support of the DART community as well. So today we have another great lineup in store for you today. I'm so excited. Just a quick overview, as you see here on the slide. I'm going to be quick so as not to repeat the more detailed overview that Josh provided yesterday. So quickly, what is DART? DART is here for you. We're here to connect you with other DART community members and stakeholders to coordinate action, advance projects, and establish productive cross-sector partnerships. We're here to advocate for you for appropriate market, facilities, and airspace access. We are here to provide you an educational platform to host industry and educational forums like this, to contribute to regional workforce development efforts and promote curriculum development and education. And we're here to support funding you, to help you identify, pursue, and secure public and private funding to support research and development, infrastructure improvement, and venture creation and growth. Here at DART, we know that the Monterey Bay is ideally positioned as a place for the cultivation and growth of DART industries. And we're here to help facilitate your contribution to the region's ecosystem. Next slide, please. Can you hear me, Doug, or team? Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And thank you, a huge thank you to the planning committee. I want to thank our all volunteer planning committee that truly made this all possible. All of these individuals put in a lot of time and effort for today. Next slide, please. We also want to, of course, thank our sponsors. We wouldn't be able to come together today like this without them. And they're all very important active members of our regional community and DART ecosystem. So speaking of important active members of our regional community, I'd like to introduce our special welcome guest, UCSC's Chancellor, Dr. Cynthia Larive. Chancellor Larive would like to tell you about what UCSC is exploring down at our MBEST Research Park, which you'll visit later this afternoon. As a brief introduction, Chancellor Larive is a first-generation college graduate, and a common thread throughout her career has been her commitment to student success, inclusion, and equity. As Chancellor, she has prioritized improving retention and graduation rates and eliminating equity gaps for students from groups traditionally underrepresented in higher education. She has also elevated the role of the campus chief diversity officer and restructured the Office of Student Affairs and Success to align with her goals. Other priorities include advancing UCSC's research profile and impact, which were highlighted by our selection to join the Association of American Universities, AAU, in 2019, and the Association of Pacific Rim Universities in 2020. She's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the American Chemical Society, and has received campus and national awards for her teaching, research, and leadership. Thank you so much, Chancellor. You have the virtual floor.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrea. It's just great to be here with you today. I wish I could be with you in person this afternoon, but I'm glad to welcome you to the 2021 Monterey Bay DART Symposium and say hello to our greater DART community. I appreciate this opportunity to pop in virtually to welcome you to the day's event and to the UC Santa Cruz AmBest Research Park, which you will visit in person later this afternoon. This research park is an incredible space that UC Santa Cruz is seeking to grow. As you'll see, we're right next to the Marina Municipal Airport. Joby Aviation has a facility at the airport and is planning to build a manufacturing facility there. CSU Monterey Bay is our neighbor there too, and our partner in considering the development of the research park. We're still in the very early stages, but we've begun moving some programs into the UC AmBest space. Among them is our CIDER program. This is the Citrus Initiative for Drone Education and Research. CIDER will be the first ever University of California undergraduate drone academic training program. It will prepare our diverse students for success in the drone and automation fields. The program focuses on 5 pillars. They are experiential learning for undergraduate and graduate students, student and faculty research support in using drones, securing contracts with federal, state, and local agencies, as well as industry, to financially support the program and student workforce development, supporting students who are traditionally underrepresented in STEM fields to diversify and strengthen the workforce, and building collaborations with industry partners and other institutions to meet industry needs and build a drone workforce in our region. Our vision for the future AmBest Research Park endeavors embraces these same pillars, supporting students, collaborating with regional academic and industry partners, and facilitating regional economic development activities like growing jobs here for a leading edge workforce. We anticipate moving our Cyber Physical Systems Research Center activities to the AmBest Research Park to join CIDER. You'll hear more later today from the center's faculty about their exciting research activities relevant to DART in 3 main areas. The first is autonomous systems. These include aerial vehicles in the national airspace as part of commercial aviation, disaster relief, and search and rescue missions, and also personal robots for household assistance and self-driving vehicles. Human sensing is the second area. This includes wearable sensors for the quantified self and for health monitoring. Also, ubiquitous positioning and localization, indoor navigation, wildlife monitoring, assistive technologies, and citizen science. And finally, the area of interconnected things. This includes traffic prediction and routing, intelligent transportation, smart cities, distributed power systems, software-enabled appliances, distributed sensing systems, and sensing using mobile phones. We have so many faculty and students at UC Santa Cruz who are working with drones, automation, and robotics on so many different topics, from surveying elephant seals to measuring snowmelt to identifying disease in plant crops. We are eager to advance innovation and workforce in these DART areas to strengthen our regional economy. The UCSC AmBest Research Park creates a new opportunity to partner and to collaborate, and we look forward to working with all of you to do that. Again, welcome and thanks for having me. I wish you a fun-filled, interesting day 2 of the symposium.
Fantastic, Chancellor. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning to welcome the DART community to day 2 here, and to tell us about the research development plans at UCSC AmBest Research Park, and especially for hosting us there this afternoon. We're so thrilled to have your support and your leadership and in advancing DART-themed growth and collaboration in our region. Before moving on with the day's events, I'd like to briefly review what we have planned for you today. Next slide, please. Reminder that you can always come back to the agenda on our website. So here's our plan, very much the same structure. We have 2 incredible keynotes. I'm so excited to hear from Bonnie Seamy in just a couple of moments. and Tokes Omishakin, our director of Caltrans. Super exciting. They sandwich an incredible lineup of 3 panels. Next slide, please. And reminder once more, come on down for the afternoon. We have a lot of great stuff to tell you about, and then a wonderful tour of Joby Aviation's activities next door to UCMS facility. Also, don't miss the post-event social hour at the General this evening. Next slide, please. Quick reminder about tomorrow, more awesome, exciting leaders and people doing exciting things in the environment that we're going to hear about tomorrow. Next slide, please. And to follow up with that, at Airspace Integration in La Salva Beach, right on the beach, an exciting, fun-filled afternoon. Definitely got to check that out. Next slide, please. All right, yay. So I'd love to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day, Bonnie Seamy. What an incredibly inspiring leader in aeronautics. Bonnie is Joby Aviation's head of air operations and people. And prior to joining the Joby team, she held several operational and strategic roles at JetBlue within flight operations, system operations, people, airports, and customer support. That is an incredibly diverse portfolio of things to lead. Most notably, she founded and led JetBlue Technology Ventures, which I would imagine is how she discovered Joby Aviation. Bonnie has commanded Boeing, Airbus, and Embraer aircraft at both United Airlines and JetBlue Airways. She is an Emmy-nominated sports reporter and a 3-time Olympian in the sport of luge. What an honor it is to have you here today, Bonnie. You have the virtual floor.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm so excited to be speaking to everyone here, and a big shout out to Amy Gross from Joby Aviation, our sustainability lead, who has been a part of this group for quite some time, and I think is on the steering committee as well. So a big shout out to her as well, and I believe you all to meet her at some of the events later this week. So today I'm going to share a little bit about the Joby story, our role here in the community, in the greater Monterey, Santa Cruz area, as well as perhaps maybe even inspire some of your family members and kids to get involved down the road as pilots and mechanics. We're going to be employing quite a few people over the years as we grow. I will have some time. I'm going to leave some time for questions. So please put them in the chat and Andrea will be able to field them. I'm going to share my screen, so I won't see the questions, but I think Andrea, you will be able to. So without further ado, I think I need to, somebody needs to enable the screen sharing so that I can share my screen. Oh, good. Okay. I have this video. Okay. And play from start. Hopefully you all can see my screen. First of all, Joby Aviation started here in the region in 2009. The founder, Joe Ben Bevert, is from the area, grew up in the hills above Bonnie Doon and Davenport, and went to Santa Cruz High School. And he had a dream. He was living up in the hills above Bonnie Doon, and the ride to school into Santa Cruz was a long one, and he wanted to fly a helicopter. But the problem of flying a helicopter is that it's noisy and it burns a lot of gas. And so, and of course, he was only 8 years old, so it was difficult to build something at that age. But he had this dream, and he went on to college to learn electrical engineering, and then business at electrical engineering at Davis and business at Stanford, with a dream of building an electric powered helicopter. Over the course of time, he has succeeded. So I'm going to tell a little bit about kind of where we are and where we're going with the company. So first of all, what's the problem we're trying to solve? It's something that we're all very, very familiar with, is the constraints of ground-based transportation, particularly in urban areas. And of the global population, over half already live in urban areas, and that will grow over time. And of course, ground-based transportation is still predominantly internal combustion engines, which add an enormous amount of CO2 emissions into the air. And in fact, in the US, it's almost 30% of the CO2 emissions is attributed to transportation, both ground and air. So what we really want to do is to help people get more time in their day, so you don't sit in traffic, but do so in an incredibly sustainable way. So if we think about sitting in ground, if you were to drive, say, from Santa Cruz over to San Jose, it might take an hour, depending on the traffic, 45 minutes to an hour, 2 hours up to San Francisco. By air, if you could get picked up right at near your doorstep and dropped off, say, at the airport, if that's where you're going, or downtown, it might take 15 minutes to get to San Jose, and maybe 20 minutes to get to San Francisco. What a difference. And think about how that could completely change lives. Now, when we add into an entire urban area, this is a map of the LA basin. And if we put in at scale 300 aircraft, the opportunity for us on a market opportunity is quite extraordinary, but it also provides the transportation in a very economical means. So our goal is that it would be the cost roughly the same for you to take a Joby aircraft, say from Burbank to Long Beach, in a Uber on the ground, might take an hour to an hour and a half in traffic, and sometimes even more. It would take about 15 to 20 minutes in a Joby and would cost the same. So it would, in the end, to match ground-based transportation is our goal. And in doing so, in just the LA basin, when we're at scale, that will solve or reduce people's time, give people time back in their day, which is one of our missions. Almost 1 million hours per year will be saved of people's time sitting in cars, reducing 13 million car trips and saving 61,000 tons of CO2 emission. So this is kind of how we're thinking about this. And through this, we're doing an integrated ground and air mobility service. So connecting in with different ride providers, bus systems, city bus systems, Ubers, Lyfts, walking to our locations, etc. So very much seamlessly. You put in where you want to go into an app, and then it'll give you the quickest destination and trip to get here. So, for example, if someone were flying, this is from the LA area, you just put it into the app. Here's where I think earlier this morning we mentioned about Joby is at the Marina airport. So yes, this is a picture of our aircraft. It is sitting in front of the hangars at Marina. It is a location of our operations and our manufacturing. We are a completely vertically integrated company. And what does that mean? Well, that means that we're designing this aircraft right now. So we're design and engineering shop. In fact, we have about 600 engineers at our company of all different, it's an amazing career opportunity for those who wish to be engineers. So we're developing it, we're testing it. We are doing test flights down at our electric air base, just near Paso Robles in King City. We have some restricted airspace there in partnership with Department of Defense. So we're testing the aircraft that's flying right now. And then we plan to deploy our aircraft once we receive FAA certification in 2024. Now, in terms of the local impact, as I mentioned, the company was actually founded in this region, and our founder is very passionate about our presence in the area and working with the communities. So we have now it's about 950 employees totally globally. A large majority of them live in Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Mateo counties. And I believe second to UC's Santa Cruz, we're one of the largest employers in the region. So our headquarters are in West Santa Cruz. Our integration test facilities are up near Bonnie Doon. We have our main operations base in Marina. So those is kind of where we are and our region. Give a little bit, this is a video of the aircraft. It takes off like a helicopter. And then gradually it transitions into an airplane. Now this is 100% electric. There are no petroleum-based products in this aircraft. It seats 4 passengers and a pilot. And it is a pilot, it's not a drone. So it is, I know a lot of people are nervous about the potential of autonomy. That could happen, but we're not betting our business model on it. We believe that the way to enter into the market is piloted. Now you can see the aircraft. It's flying like an airplane. Incredibly simple aircraft to fly. As the aircraft comes around, it will, as a pilot flying it, and I've flown it in our simulators quite a bit, very, very simple to fly, and it transitions back to a helicopter. You can see it gradually transitioning back to a helicopter seamlessly. Its flight controls are extremely sophisticated. It uses the same type of flight controls as the F-35 aircraft in the military. So it's very minimal control experience needed to fly the aircraft, which is great as we build out our pilot report. You can see the aircraft is coming in to land, and it will decelerate straight to hover and then land vertically again. All right. So hopefully that gave you a bit sense, and I'll kind of recap what's so special about this aircraft. First of all, it's, and all of you who I hope will be future passengers, will be nice to know it is designed for safety. So what's really interesting about our aircraft as compared to, say, a helicopter, a passenger carrying helicopter can have up to 160 single points of failure. You can think about the rotors or the motors, if it's a single engine, all of these, whereas ours have no single points of failure. All of the batteries and the motors, there's duplication across all of them. If you lose one motor, the other motor on a propeller unit picks up the load. If you lose both motors on a propeller unit, that one will depower, and then the opposite motor will depower, propeller will depower, so the aircraft remains stable. So we can hover with four propellers turning, and it can fly like an airplane with 2 propellers turning. So as you can see, massive redundancy. It's also extraordinarily quiet, and I have a couple of slides here later where I'll illustrate that. And then, of course, the entire program that we're building is designed for sustainability. And as you can see, the aircraft, of course, is a zero emission aircraft, but also as we work through our manufacturing plant and that we have in Marina, looking towards a zero footprint on at the manufacturing plant and transitioning to as much electric manufacturing as possible. The aircraft itself has a 150-mile range and can go 200 miles an hour. So that's kind of gives you a general sense of our aircraft. Now I'll talk a little bit about the noise, because I think one of the things that people are most concerned about is if the skies are filled with aircraft like this, was this going to be noise pollution? Never mind the, yes, we can solve for the emissions, but what about noise? Our aircraft is designed to be nearly silent as it flies overhead. And even when it takes off, it sounds, it pretty much blends into the atmosphere, into the local area sound. So it sounds a bit like a fan, certainly not a drone and definitely not a helicopter. And when it's at cruise, it really sounds just above the leaves in the wind. So I have a video here, and what we did, because it's one of these things where you just really have to see it to believe it and hear it to believe it. And we will soon be operating out of Marina, so we'll be having public viewing times. But right now it's in a restricted airspace in Central California. So we've got some videos. And what we did is we had a variety of aircraft that one might find in a community, and we had them all fly overhead at 1,500 feet. We also, as we did an exact comparison, we've also had NASA come verify our numbers. So what I'd like to do is I have a short, it's about a 1-minute video where you'll see about 5 different types of aircraft, a single engine aircraft, a twin engine aircraft, a single engine helicopter, a twin engine helicopter fly overhead. You can see we've got the acoustic signals as well as the sound. So hopefully this will work. So this is single engine, twin engine, single engine helicopter, another helicopter, twin engine, leaves in the wind. So that gives you a sense. We're incredibly proud of the noise signature, and we believe it is what is going to allow us to scale into cities. So how are we coming along in terms of our aircraft and our certification? These aircraft will be certified by the FAA. And there's sort of several steps along the process. The first is we work with the FAA to refine what are the rules by which we will certify our aircraft. That rule base, because the FAA has never certified an aircraft that takes off vertically and flies like an airplane and is all electric. There have been military aircraft that have taken off vertically and then transitioned, but not electric ones. And the military ones are not FAA certified. So we are the first. So we did agree. And what is that? The rules by which we will certify. And now we're building out the testing processes by which we will prove that we will meet those requirements. And then we will demonstrate the compliance, and then we will begin the verification, which will happen in 2023, leading into 2024, so that we'll be able to operate our service in 2024. A couple of things that we're working on right now, and it's important for you to know in terms of operating. The aircraft will operate as an air carrier, regular, certified by the FAA. We are getting licensed right now, and we'll be operating with certified aircraft to start with, and then we'll add on the Joby aircraft in 2024 once it's certified. Our pilots will be commercial level pilots, existing as today, and we'll be building out a pilot training facility, and looking forward to questions on that one. And then we'll be operating in the existing FAA airspace rules. So for those who are passengers, know that we're fitting exactly into the existing systems as they are today. So how does it actually work? You would open up an app, and you might open up like an Uber app or a Lyft app or any of the integrations that we may have. You may open up a Joby app. Someone will then come pick you up if you aren't already at one of our vertiports, drive you to our vertiport, fly in our aircraft, and then have someone meet you on the other end. So it's a seamless end-to-end experience from destination, from origin to destination. And with that, I'm gonna open it up for questions.
That was fantastic, Bonnie. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So interesting. I have actually several questions. There is a question in the chat that I just wanted to confirm that I believe you mentioned even in your talk that the aircraft is at a site in Central California at the moment, and there will be other times to view the actual aircraft in Marina at another time. But today's tour will be on the facility, and there will be plenty more videos too to share. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
So we have the aircraft that you saw flying there is down at a location in Central California. We'll be adding additional aircraft to our fleet over the coming months. And we anticipate that we'll be operating out of Marina in early next year. So at that point, you'll be able to find to come visit.
Great, thank you. I want our attendees to feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll do our best to get those answered. I see a couple already. I did have a question about your impressive, like fully vertically integrated operations, and that is really impressive. And there's so many questions related to that. I'm so interested in the fact that you're all electric and you make all of your own parts, and you're doing it here in Marina. And even you just mentioned, you know, that you're going to be training pilots. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, where are you going to source your pilots, and what are your plans for that?
Yes, so I'm incredibly excited. This is something I've been passionate about for years, back at when I was working at JetBlue as well. So for those who know about the aviation industry and kind of what is happening in terms of pilots, so there is a massive pilot shortage that was about to dramatically impact the airlines just prior to COVID. And then, of course, COVID hit and air travel dropped, but now air travel is coming back, and the pilot shortage is exacerbated. And so by 2023, airlines will be canceling flights because they won't have enough pilots. So how does that work then for us? Because we're going to need thousands of pilots. In fact, we've kind of done our modeling, and through 2028, we're going to need to train 15,000 pilots. So how do we get 15,000 pilots? Well, we actually have to build that process ourselves. And so we're going to be building out, in fact, we're in the process of doing this right now, building out some FAA certified flight schools. And we'll do pods all around, initially it'll be in California because we're largely California based for now, but building out in Marina, for example, possibly down in Paso Robles. We've actually done and looked at several of the regional small airports, you know, Stockton, Modesto, Sacramento, some of these, and partnering with several of the community colleges to build out some aviation education programs. And capturing, starting with the high school. So the way we look at this is a great opportunity for youth starting in their junior year in high school. By the time they graduate, they can have completed their private pilot ground school, which we will be providing free to high schools around the country. And then roll right into our training program as we partner with different colleges. So complete a 2-year training program along with a community college. They will then be employed by us as pilots. So you can think about a 19-year-old earning, you know, $50 an hour for a job, paying back, we'll be covering the cost of their college, and they'll be able to work with us for 4 years until they have enough hours to become an airline pilot. So they will have earned a far more than even a living wage. After 4 years, will graduate debt-free from college and have a career path right to the airlines where they can make 6-figure income right away. So it's a really amazing career path that we're mapping out. And the same thing for mechanics, because the aircraft also need maintenance and then also manufacturing technicians. So working with some workforce development programs. So we're incredibly excited about this piece.
That's really exciting. We have so many questions coming in. We can also follow up with these questions too by email or on our website, but one that was related to this topic. Gosh, what type of requirements are there for becoming a pilot of the Joby aircraft?
Yeah, so to become a pilot for Joby aircraft in commercial service, so operating with passengers, so we'll need to have a commercial pilot's license. And but that's what our students would be going through. So they will complete from no flight experience all the way through to a commercial license within about a year. They then become an instructor to build more experience. And at 500 hours of experience, they are then allowed to operate our aircraft. And that's roughly about a year to a year and a half of flight training and exposure. So it's a commercial instrument pilot license is what is required.
Okay, wow. So I guess a little bit more, if you could expand on your vertical integration strategy. There's a question here. Will Joby act as an airliner, a manufacturer, or both?
Yeah, so excellent question. When we talk about vertical integration, we are indeed really vertically integrated in that we will both build the aircraft and operate them. And part of the reason this is so important is these aircraft are very highly advanced and they're basically flying computers. It's incredibly important for the manufacturer to be closed looped operating with the operator so that we can maintain the aircraft. It's so different compared to traditional aircraft. And so it is the safest way to operate. So these aircraft will not be for sale. They will be operated within our network. Yes.
Wow. Here's a great one. Where do you think the hourly operating costs will come in for the platform relative to traditional platforms? So I think cost comparing a Joby ride versus another aircraft ride.
So we will compare ourselves to ground-based transportation because we're not going to be replacing, large airliner flights. It'll be urban transportation. So our goal is to get to the cost of what it would be for you to take a ride sharing like an Uber on the ground. So think of it about moving from $3 a mile down to $1 a mile. So a 25-mile trip costing $25. That's in terms of, and how might we be able to do that? Well, part of this is because the cost to operate the aircraft is so much lower than an internal combustion engine aircraft. So for example, for those who either have an electric powered aircraft like a Tesla or know somebody who does, you likely know that they don't go to the maintenance shop very often. Because there's just not that many moving parts, and the cars don't break down as much, and that'll be this is the same for our aircraft. So much less wear and tear on the aircraft because there's many fewer moving parts. And as someone asked about the motors, we are again vertically integrated. We are building our own motors because they are, and our own batteries as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And along those lines, what is the charge time for the aircraft?
Yeah, so if you, our typical stage length or length of a flight will be between 25 to 50 miles. So whereas the aircraft can go 150 miles. And so it's similar to charging a car. In fact, the charging requirements are similar to, say, charging a Tesla. It's not overly onerous. But in terms of a short, if we've only flown, say, 25 miles, the charge time would be about 5 minutes, which is the time that it'll take the passengers to get off and the new set of passengers to come on. And so it's a very, very short charge time. If we fly a full 150 miles to get a full charge, then it'll take about 40 minutes. So we tend to, most of our stage lengths are going to be short across the cities.
Great. Wow. So you mentioned this is comparable to ground transportation, and we're wondering about, who's your audience? Is this for more of a wealthier demographic? Who can take these new air taxis and have access to that?
Yes. Well, initially, obviously, as we initially operate, the cost will be a little bit higher, but less than, say, taking a helicopter. But even then, I mean, I can't afford to be flying in a helicopter for rides. So I can't afford that. So initially they'll be a little bit more expensive, but still less expensive than a helicopter. Again, our goal is to get to the same cost as what it would be if you were to take, say, an Uber ride. So large majority of our population can afford to take an Uber ride. And so that will be, kind of where we're doing now. Some people can't do that every single day. But again, to make it convenient so that pretty much anybody could have access.
Great. That's fantastic. Well, we can take maybe one more question or two, depending. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with the FAA in terms of flying this, aircraft in urban areas and dense densely populated areas and, you know, your timeline in terms of actually making this a business that's a, you know, a regular everyday thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we partner with the FAA in quite a few different areas. So there's the certification of the aircraft itself, and that's one branch of the FAA. There's another branch of the FAA that certifies us as an airline. That's the one that I'm working with right now. There's another branch of the FAA that certifies our flight school that we will be operating with soon. There's still another branch of the FAA that certifies our approaches and landing into urban areas. And then there's the state and local communities that help certify the actual landing areas themselves. So what's pretty exciting is our aircraft, as you see, it can fly like an airplane, it can land like an airplane. So there's 5,000 general aviation airports around the country. So even in our area right here, you know, there's Marina Airport, there's Salinas, there's Watsonville, there's Half Moon Bay, Paso Robles. So there's a lot of those airports right away. And then in terms of heliports, there are heliports that then can be reactivated. A lot of the heliports were closed in communities because of noise. And again, I'm going to come back to our entry into communities is because it's going to be much more accessible because we're not noisy. So reactivating some of the heliports, but there's a new form of landing zone that the FAA is certifying, and they're called vertiports. And what a vertiport is, will have much heavier restriction on noise. So it's only intended for very quiet vehicles and also only electric powered. So there won't be all the fire requirements that are for normal heliports. Because of gas fires. And so the vertiports and licensing vertiports. So we are in partnerships with several companies like Macquarie and Reef, which have parking garages. So an excellent use of parking garages. I don't know if any of you have been to parking garages near airports, but they used to be packed all the time. Now they're not packed anymore. Not just because maybe COVID was of travel, but even before then, because people stopped driving their cars to the airport. It's the same thing for grocery malls. People are shopping online more. So parking garages, what do you do with these parking garages? So yes, they're an excellent place for a vertiport.
That's great. Okay, one last quick question, Bonnie, a personal question. What inspired you to join Joby and leave JetBlue Ventures that you developed and led yourself, and all the other incredible roles that you've had with these, you know, very established airlines and businesses, and leave for this startup and a totally, you know, innovative new direction that's never been tried?
Yeah, well, you're right. As when I led the JetBlue Ventures, we invested in Joby. So I met Joben Bevert, the founder, in 2017. The company had about 50 people and had a prototype flying. And I went down to their flight base, which was in Central California, and I watched it fly. But more importantly, I heard it fly, or I should say, I didn't hear it fly. It was so quiet, and I thought to myself, this is going to totally transform aviation. Electric propulsion will transform aviation just like jet propulsion did in the 60s. And I thought, what an amazing opportunity to be a part of the future and to really have an instrumental role in that. So actually, you know, initially I was on the board for many years. And then Joben asked if I could come in to help start our airline. Because in the end, you know, in 5 years when we got 15,000 pilots and, you know, 3,000 airplanes, it's the largest fleet. It'll be the largest fleet in the world in terms of aircraft. And so that's a pretty amazing opportunity. So, you know, we're everywhere from, I mean, we're now, you know, we're going to be speaking at the COP26 event in Glasgow coming up here in a couple of weeks, World Economic Forum, where, you know, Amy's helping us work through, and as we map the UN sustainability goals, there's so much opportunity and we can, you know, impact so many different areas. So it's a great personal and professional opportunity to work at Joby. And I'm going to put a plug, you know, for all the future, for folks who are interested, you can certainly reach out to me, Amy, or on our website. And also, yes, we do partner. I see the question about the Bob Hoover Academy. we're actually in contact with that group as well. So we're very much ingrained into this local community to help A, provide transportation for everyone, but B, also provide jobs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bonnie. That was just so incredibly interesting and super exciting for Joby and also for the Monterey Bay. I mean, I think with Joby's visionary innovation and commitment to its community, Joby is such an important anchor for the anchor business for Monterey Bay. We are so grateful for your time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So let's head into our panel sessions with UCSC's own Dean of the School of Engineering, Dr. Alexander Wolf. He's going to moderate our first panel, Autonomy and Electrification. Dean Wolf, please go ahead and lead the panel discussion of the two primary catalytic innovations making advanced air mobility possible, right? Autonomy and electrification. Is everybody here? Do we have Dehan, Michael, Kenyon, and Michael Reed, Michael Norkia too? Everybody's here? You can put your hand up so that you come to the front for everybody to see you. Thank you. Fantastic. All right, I'll mute myself.
All right. Thanks so much, Andrea. And it's a real pleasure to join everyone today. And following what was a really, really interesting presentation and discussion, we're going to move on to autonomy and electrification. Before that, I just want to mention that we have a lot of really interesting work going on in Baskin Engineering, as you can imagine. We are joined by a number of faculty at the symposium who are engaged in really relevant and interesting work to the whole drone and autonomous air vehicle ecosystem that's just exploding here in the Monterey Bay Area. So I'm really interested in having people come visit with us and engage with us. I want to highlight the facilities that we have and activities we have at the Westside Research Park, which is a research facility on Delaware Avenue on the west side of Santa Cruz. I'll mention two things that are going on there, two of several things. One is we have this ridiculously wonderful flying arena with high-speed video capture, motion capture camera system. It's huge. You should come see it. We have a robotics lab down there that is operated by Mircea Teodorescu and Steve McGuire. Steve is, I'll just mention that he recently led a team in the DoD Subterranean Challenge, where they came in third place and won a $500,000 prize with his students. So wonderful work there. We also have down on Westside Research Park, the Smart Power Lab. Keith Corzine and Leila Parsa are our lead faculty there. They're looking at two very interesting things. One is microgrid technology, which of course we all need a lot more electricity these days to take over from our gas-powered energy. And Leila has also got a really interesting project on powertrain for all electric vehicles, air vehicles. So again, I invite you to come down, visit us, and take a look at the things going on. Let's see. So let's get to our panelists and hear from them. Each of them will speak for about 3 to 5 minutes, introduce themselves and the work that they're doing, and then they we'll take questions at the end. So please enter your questions in the chat or as they come along, or in the Q&A, and we'll try to field those as we go. Well, field them at the end. Okay. So first up is Dehan Milutinovic, and Dehan is a professor in the electrical and computer engineering department here at the Basson School of Engineering. Dehan.
Thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, okay, so let me just start presentation. Okay, so okay. Okay. Thank you, Alex. I'm Dejan Milutinovic. I'm professor of electrical and computer engineering at UC Santa Cruz. I'll limit my presentation to 3 to 4 slides about the major topic of my research. There are a lot more that we are doing in my lab, but I'll focus on our research on UAVs and autonomous systems. So on this part of the slides here, I want to point out that the type of work that we do is unique in a sense that we deal with the problems of our UAV navigation in terms of addressing uncertainties. And what is unique about my work is that we don't address uncertainty only through the data, but actually by modeling uncertainty and quantifying uncertainty through stochastic models. Therefore, we design like stochastic optimal controllers. Those are controllers which are robust to our stochastic uncertainties. In this case, this is just a simple example from the very beginning of this line of research, where you see like a ground vehicle going over path, but you don't really know what is the path that this vehicle is going to go. Therefore, there is some sort of a cone of probability that this vehicle is going to follow, and you try to keep a constant distance to the vehicle to be able to track it. However, you don't know what this vehicle is going to
I think Dejan's having electrical interference here with his audio.
Dehan, you may want to try just turning off your video for more bandwidth so we can hear you. We're not hearing you if you can hear us.
Well, in the interest of time, I think what we should do is we should hand it over to our second panelist, Michael Norcia, co-founder and CEO of PICA, Autonomous Electric Aircraft. I hope, Michael, I'm not taking you by surprise here, but
no, sounds good. Yeah.
If you're ready to go, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Well, I'll just start with a quick introduction of myself. So I'm Michael Norcia. I'm the CEO of PICA, also more or less the CTO of the company. Very technical background. I think most important thing to know about me is that I've just been deeply, deeply passionate about aviation for my entire life. So for me, like earliest memories all involve building little model aircraft in my backyard. I think by the time I was 15, I'd probably spent 10,000 hours just building and mostly crashing model aircraft. So aviation is something I'm just really, really passionate about. So excited to be working on it this decade, where I think there's, genuinely more opportunity than probably any other decade in human history. So I will switch over to quick presentation here. Really high level. So we build autonomous electric aircraft at PICA. We founded the company in 2017, so we've actually been at this for a little while now, about 5 years. Kind of like differentiated theses for PICA were to really focus on like looking aircraft rather than eVTOL aircraft. eVTOLs were something that I worked on quite a bit before PICA. I think they're really, really awesome technology, but also very, very difficult and have sort of a set of a set of challenges that we weren't particularly interested in tackling. So from day one, we were focused on more conventional takeoff and landing aircraft. I'm definitely also interested in very short takeoff and landing aircraft in particular. And so that's been very useful in the ag environment where we're often setting up new infrastructure. So we developed two products. We have a crop spraying aircraft, which we call the Pelican. You can see it over here. It's really cool. It's about a 1,200-pound aircraft. It's more than half liquid by gross weight. So it's got a big chemical tank right below the wing there that holds about 700 pounds of liquid. That aircraft is in commercial operation right now, which is super exciting. So we sent two to our first commercial launch customer in Costa Rica over the last 4 months. We've got a very strong backlog for this product. It's people in Latin America in particular really, really excited about it, starting out with the banana region there. Sorry, didn't mention the second product. I'll get to that in the next slide. So yeah, sort of similar to Joby and many of the companies in this space were, arguably fairly vertically integrated. So we develop a lot of the different core technologies behind the aircraft. We do almost all of the elements of the electric propulsion system in-house. So batteries, everything sort of outside of cell level technology we do. We develop our own motor controllers, and we do quite a bit of work on motors as well. All of the software that runs the aircraft we've developed in-house. So it's all safety critical software and firmware, and all of the avionics that sits below it, we do ourselves. Some really, really cool stuff there specific to the ag mission. Like the aircraft's got a forward-facing LiDAR on the front of the aircraft that it can use to sort of see the world and navigate around it, which is quite important for crop spraying because you're flying about 9 feet from the ground most of the time. Then we also develop the custom carbon fiber airframe behind the aircraft as well. And most of this is currently happening in Oakland. So, quite nearby. We do a lot of flight testing work in the Davis area, Merced as well. So yeah, this is really, has been our main focus for the last 4.5, 5 years. I'm really, really excited to grow this product. But we're working on another aircraft as well, which is I'm truly excited about. So this is, our entry into the passenger and cargo carrying space. And we call it the P3. And just, really high level, this is kind of our the conclusion we came to of what the minimum viable product for kind of, answering a lot of questions around new business models and the autonomous and electric use cases. So in the passenger carrying configuration, it's set up for 9 passengers. In the cargo configuration, it's set up for about 2,500 pounds of payload. So broadly speaking, it's like a 21st century Cessna Caravan. So we'll be kicking off the development of this product later this year, which is really exciting. Shooting for first flight by the end of next year. So very, very aggressive timeline on that. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. That's really exciting. It's really exciting stuff. Next up to introduce himself is Kenyon Kluge, who is the Director of Electrical Engineering at Zero Motorcycles.
Hello. Let's see, how do I share my screen here? Oh, apologize. Here we go. All right. And okay, so as I said, I'm Kenyon Kluge. I'm the Director of Electrical Engineering at Zero Motorcycles. I'll show a frame of some of the things that we do cover, but basically the electrical engineering on an electric motorcycle is a lot of the product. And I've been with Zero Motorcycles since 2008. So as the original engineer hired there, and I've seen it grow, and we're really growing our team a lot too into the to cover all of our needs and to expand our technology and what we're able to do. So feel like a little bit of the outsider here. We're on the ground and rolling on Earth rather than up in the air. But still pretty exciting technology, and have done a lot of work in in batteries and battery technology, which is leading to a lot of these systems that are being talked about today. So Zero Motorcycles is located here in Scotts Valley. We're just outside of Santa Cruz. It was founded in 2006. So we've been around for quite a while. We really started putting product out on the market in 2008 and have been shipping consistently year on year since then. So we've been doing this for quite a long time in relative to a lot of the battery electric systems and companies out there. This is a new slide, although even so, it's a little out of date. We're I think closer to 300, maybe more employees now. So we're growing very rapidly. And just to plug it, we need really fantastic people to come work on some really fantastic products. So if you go to zeromotorcycles.com, we do have an employment section there, and really looking for people to come join our company and do fun things with us. So we design, manufacture, and distribute our motorcycles. So manufacturing is also here in Scotts Valley. We build the batteries, we build the whole bikes. We receive a few sub-assemblies, but for the most part, really all production is done here, and employ a lot of people in the area. And we're pretty much global now. There are a few countries that we don't go into, but for the most part, we ship worldwide and have distributors into some of the smaller countries that we don't have direct dealerships in. We're still privately funded at this time, and we have built out our global supply chain to meet our needs. The motorcycle is the central part. This kind of shows our what we call our Cypher 3 system, which is really everything software and electrical falls under this designator of Cypher 3 and its integration. So battery, charger, the motor and motor controller. We do have a motor and motor controller group, so that's really the only electrical part that doesn't fall under my group. We work very closely with Bosch developing traction control and ABS systems. Our dash, we have a mobile app, and we have a connectivity module. So this all comes together to build what we consider a pretty premium motorcycle. So it has a lot of features that you'll see on the very top end motorcycles out there, and are doing some pretty neat things with that. I know one of the other focuses here is autonomy, and you might think, well, where does that come in on motorcycles? Motorcycles are inherently dangerous, and people that ride them like danger, right? So, but with that, as we're moving into the next generation, it's really critical to make everything as safe as possible. So we're looking at vehicle to grid technologies, lane awareness, adding all the first levels of autonomy to assist the rider in really being much safer on the road. So that's where a lot of that integration and our dipping our toes into the autonomy sector is. So thank you.
Thanks, Kenyon. Sorry for mashing your name.
No, that's all right.
I can take down your share. Let's go back to Dehan, who should be back with us. And I think, Dehan, you're going to try to do this without your video, or maybe with your video.
Yes, thank you. I do. Thank you. I appreciate. So I'll just switch off the video and then share my screen with slides. Okay. So I'll just try to be even shorter than I planned initially. So basically, I wanted to say that, can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I just want to say that in my research, we use advanced mathematics, but it's not all for the sake of theoretical work. We do flight tests. with the Air Force Research Lab, where we actually apply our work in the field and verify. And the next step, once we work on a simpler controllers, which solves the problem of like how single aerial vehicle or single autonomous vehicle can be navigated, we are interested in the problem of how to do a composition of navigation controls for the multiple vehicles, as well as how to do a composition of multiple controllers for a single vehicle. Overall, the whole idea of the work is to somehow immerse autonomous system in real world, and what we call it like provable intelligent autonomous systems. So not just to have like an autonomous system that can survive in the real world, but have a proof which is not just based on the data, but of a rigorous mathematical theory that this can work and survive in the real world. This is just like an example. This is like a problem in Air Force. This problem is called the loyal wingman problem. It is the problem in which you have like one UAV freely or unmanned vehicle freely navigating, while the other one is following and either from the right or from the left. And then what happened is that I will fast forward the video. And then at some point you can say to your wingman to go to somewhere in direction that you actually are not really comfortable to go. And that vehicle goes. And then after visiting a certain point in space, that vehicle knows how autonomously get back to you and follow you on your path. So that's one example of like autonomous navigation we do in my group. The other one, it's related to ground vehicles. And here I just want to show you, it's a work where we use like a tricycle, and this tricycle autonomously navigates through the sequence of the gates. Idea is that this sequence of the gates kind of, it's like describes the road or a path. And then this vehicle simultaneously, when it figures out that there is a certain sharp turn, it actually knows how to navigate back and forth, and then figure out how to actually get to its destination. So I'll conclude my short presentation with the acknowledgement of my collaborators that I've worked during the years. I would especially want to acknowledge my collaborators from Air Force Research Lab, specifically Dr. David Casebeer, as well as other collaborators, including Alexandra Faust from Google Research, that I'm collaborated with on a tricycle navigation problem. If you have any question, or you would like to chat about interesting control problem about general autonomous systems, yeah, feel free to contact me, and yeah, we can arrange a meeting and have a discussion or conversation about interesting problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Dehan. Thank you. Glad we got to see that. Okay, last up, Michael Reed, who is co-founder and CEO of Skybase.
G'day, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on, and thanks very much. A bit of a shout out to Chris Blay for getting me involved, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen, same as the others, and just run through a short presentation. Can you guys hear and see a black screen at the moment?
Yep.
Great. My background, I was been 2 decades in aerospace as a pilot in the Australian Air Force, and then got brought over to New Zealand to be chief test pilot, and then head of sales for the jetpack company, and realised that there's a pretty big gap in the market, and so started up Skybase in 2017, and have built a team around me. Now I've got 2 other co-founders. what we do is solve some pretty big industry problems. You look at the costs of those assets there, it's all about getting the return on investment in aviation. And sometimes it can take a long time, like 20 years. But you've got, huge limitations as well with underutilization of assets, safety incidents, and then the actual costs of paying pilots. So what we do is effectively take the pilot out of the plane for areas where the world really needs it. So looking at, say, the Locust Problem at the moment, not many people know about how devastating it is. 2020 was the worst year on record, and a single swarm can eat 10 million people's food every day. But we can't spray them during the day, at night, sorry, when they're on the ground, because you can't fly at low level at night safely. And same with wildfires becoming worse, especially in California and Australia. And you can't do that at night either. And then you look at food production, and very similar, I guess, to pica. We need to double food production by 2050, but that can't be done at night at low level. And it's actually the best time to spray crops because you've got no wind, no birds, no bees, etc. So what we can see is there's really big limitations in the industry about all these aeroplanes that can only have limited usage, their environmental effects, insurance issues, and obviously underutilization of assets. And that has a big effect on all of us. So in essence, if you look at in the US across ag, aerial firefighting, daytime only, aerial mapping, and cargo, there are a number of aircraft sitting there, existing aircraft that are underutilized assets. And this is hugely expensive for the industry and for society. Cargo is obviously the biggest market, and that's where our competitors are focused. We're taking a slightly different approach to the market. So what our actual product is called Sophie, consists of that system that you put in the aircraft upgrade kit, and then it connects to our universal ground cockpit anywhere in the world. And that allows a pilot on the ground to confidently monitor and assertively intervene. So this is flight autonomy, but you still need a human in the loop. And that's very similar to Joby and initially Pica. The point of having a qualified pilot to sit there and intervene is essential. We're doing it a slightly different route, and it's going pretty well. This is the aircraft we're currently testing in New Zealand, and it's really exciting progress. We're a small startup. We're raising some money. We're coming to the US as well, and we're hoping to compete with our very well-funded US brethren. So that's us.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. One observation is I'm really enjoying the fact that pilots are getting involved in this part of the business and are making an impact, after really bringing their experience to bear on these problems. I think that's such an important aspect of the people who are involved. And I'll mention that Steve McGuire, for example, a faculty member I mentioned earlier, he was a Marine helicopter pilot in the Middle East. So again, bringing those experiences, those real world experiences is critical. Let's see, let's start with a question that comes to my mind. Oh, by the way, Kenyon, I'm sure you enjoy riding your motorcycle too. So it's not just pilots. Let's start with a question actually on unmanned traffic management, which is requiring an entirely new approach to air traffic control. There's a question about whether, well, certainly manned and unmanned vehicles will be intermixing, which is already a problem we've seen on the ground. How is this going to be addressed, you think, in the air? I'd like to take that. Just jump in.
Well, if I may, I'll just follow up on what I said during the presentation to connect to this question. I think the navigation should address the situations in which things may or may not happen, and that's a critical one. having a too conservative approaches may actually impede any progress. So we have to be aware about what is the risk, and then probably deal with this situation. And of course, infrastructure, which I think other panelists can speak more about.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there to talk a little bit about the role of, I guess, how aviation actually works in regards to having aeroplanes not hit each other. There's a surprising amount that's done on the radio, talking to air traffic control and to other aircraft. And so having a human-centered system is essential at the moment. And that will change with the rollout of UTM. But that means that you need aircraft to be able to communicate to each other and to a central control organisation autonomously. And mixing the two, having humans and I guess autonomous technology, is a really bad idea. You need to have separate transit lanes. You need to have separate ways of operating, because if you've ever listened on an aircraft radio, it's firstly really hard to hear, and you have people from all over the world with different accents. Yes, we're all talking English, but you often have to advise, say again, or get repeat instructions and communicate really clearly. And with autonomy, you're obviously denied that opportunity to get in there and say, hey, what's happening. There is one of our competitors that's looking to address this with some voice recognition software that can handle this side of things. But with the role of pilots in UTM, it really comes down to a transition period over the next 10 years about how do we learn all of the lessons that we need to learn, because there's a lot of learning that we need to do safely, and then transition to a fully autonomous system.
Okay.
I think if I could, one really quick is on the ground, you don't really have that choice. There's human-driven vehicles, humans just walking around, pedestrians, so you face it all. And I think that what we're really looking at is two sides of that. Is one, how do you get enough information to make the intelligent choices, and that's looking at sensor inputs. So networking in order to have multiple sensors and information from all vehicles around you, not just your own vehicle, so that you can make good decisions based on that. But then balancing that with still allowing the pilot or the driver of the vehicle to still have the same functionality that they had before, but just augment their input and their knowledge about the current situation, so that they can still react. They can do the human thing to do the right thing, but have it be augmented by the systems that are assisting them with their driving day to day. I see that that's probably going to feed into aeronautics as well. It's kind of the same problem across the board.
Okay, let's talk about manufacturing for a little while. And we heard that Pika's in Oakland, which is kind of an interesting location for a manufacturing site. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about some of the advantages or disadvantages of that location? And then, of course, we also have Skybase that's in New Zealand. Another kind of very different kind of environment for manufacturing. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I think every startup sort of goes through a few phases. The first phase, like time, is the most expensive resource. And then eventually when you're shipping shipping products to customers, money becomes the most expensive resource. We're still in the time era. And so for us, just consolidating our whole operation in Oakland has made sense. Long-term, Oakland's obviously not a good place to do like high volume, high labor hour production. So we're actually already looking at setting up a facility in Costa Rica, about 5 miles from a 20-kilometer by 20-kilometer banana plantation. So that's long-term where these aircraft will be produced.
And I can echo that as well. What Michael said is about the cost of time. As a small company, we're, I guess, still pre-production. We're still testing. What we can do in New Zealand is get through that and get through the certification side quite quickly. But fundamentally, you need to be in the US, either in California or Texas, in my opinion, to be able to produce stuff for aerospace on volume.
Yeah, obviously there have been some severe supply chain issues lately, and particularly with respect to computer controllers. And I'm sure that all of the technologies we've been talking about are heavily dependent on that supply chain. Any specific thoughts about supply chain?
Well, yeah, definitely for aviation products, it's very relevant because most things ship in shipping containers. So yeah, for us, I mean, that's a big consideration around centralizing production with our customer pool in Latin America. In terms of like supply shortage of silicon devices, that's been annoying for us. It's like, you know, one more thing for our EE team to deal with is revving hardware to, you know, swap out component A for component B. I'd be curious to hear from Keenan what Zero's been doing about it. I imagine it could be much more difficult for them than folks like us, where you can, you know, buy enough BMS chips on eBay to last you for a year. Probably can't do that at Zero.
No, that's definitely a real challenge right now. In fact, I probably have 3 or 4 more meetings about that exact topic later today. Yeah, I mean, it's more than just the containers. There, a lot of the foundries are operating only 3 days a week due to blackouts and power constraints in the Asia territories. So supply is expected to not get better in the short term and just get worse. So I think all of our companies are going to have to figure out how to have multiple sources of chips, which means more engineering, just making sure that you could drop in, say, a different processor because you can't get the processor that you need, or some other chip. So being agile and having the ability to move, and the same thing as being close to manufacturing. Our engineers can walk out to the line and see what's going on the manufacturing floor, and that's essential when you need to move quickly and be very agile with your development.
I might just add, one of the things that I've noticed being outside of the US is just how important the US is for the aerospace industry. And a good example, we needed a particular certifiable battery. It's taken us nearly a year in shipping to get it from the US to New Zealand.
Okay. Andrea, how are we doing on time?
Wow, we're doing great. If there are any other questions, we could take a couple more.
Okay, great.
This is really so interesting to me. I really, the fact that Joby and Pica, and you know, there's so much vertical integration. It's really impressive, and I didn't realize that was related to time and sort of acquiring what's needed to do things fast. And yeah, I guess, oh, I don't have my video on, I apologize. I was wondering a little bit about the electrification part of everything we're talking about here on this panel. And, you know, in terms of that being obviously something that makes sense for the future in terms of climate impact, I was wondering about whether, you know, in terms of the value it has to the technology, you know, what is more important, like the weight or the power? And if, you know, we could geek out a little bit on that about like what, you know, what are the trade-offs and what they're considering in their different vehicles, whether motorcycles or airplanes.
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. So I've worked on eVTOL programs and then am now working on fixed wing programs. And the requirements are really, really different between those two. So an eVTOL aircraft is extremely sensitive to all of the propulsion system figures of merit. So like, you know, how many kilowatts per kilogram your motor is, for example. Like the whole mass of the vehicle scales non-linearly with that figure of merit. And so you end up with a lot of the folks in the eVTOL world working on just incredibly optimized propulsion systems because of that, which requires vertical integration. We're in a little bit of a different territory with like conventional fixed wing where I don't know, there's some coefficient that like the figure of merit is raised to, and in an eVTOL, it's like probably more than squared. For a fixed wing aircraft, I think it's, I don't know what it is, but it's not that bad. So nevertheless, though, there just aren't really good vendors making aviation motors and aviation motor controllers, et cetera, right now. So like folks use, Zero Motorcycles propulsion system to fly their aircraft around, I think, and like Zero's not super happy about it probably. But that's just a good example. Like people would literally buy a motorcycle to like grab the stuff from it. So it's sort of it's a weird world that we live in where like vertical integration, I think, leads to some incredible products like Tesla, and the iPhone, et cetera. But companies are being forced into it just due to a lack of options. So I don't really know what's going to happen over the next 5 years. Like it's kind of a weird industry that's forming with, probably 20 different companies all producing their own silicon carbide inverter, which is just a little bit bizarre. But I think good things will come of it.
Yeah, I think the reason that people are using a lot of the zero powertrains in aviation is the weight is a real consideration. And we found when we first started in that like you said, there wasn't any good options. So we've gone in and designed a lot of our own. It's on a motorcycle, of course, it's critical to be as light as possible. So that was a key focus in designing our own components and why we pulled some of that IP in-house rather than trying to use stuff off the shelf. I think that there's a lot of innovation going in there now, though, now that the industry is turning around, and one company maybe can't do everything. So it's exciting that a lot of that's coming around. But I think on the whole, with electrification and Andrea, one of your questions about what's important, it changes from time to time. At first, it was kind of just getting something that went down the road, and then it became range, and now range isn't quite such an issue with batteries, and now fast charging is the next focus. And the chemistries that go into the cells that focus on each of these different areas have advantages and disadvantages. So I think as technology progresses, the focus changes and your bottleneck moves from one area to another. So it's hard to say from day to day what the next one is, but we have the laundry list and we'll see which one is most important from one day to the next.
And I think,
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
To that point of evolution too, I think an interesting thing for aviation companies is that they initially are targeting figures of merit as their sort of important metric of like, how do we make our battery maximally energy dense at a specific power density? And you're only making like 3 prototype packs or something like that. And that's a really hard problem. And then it shifts to like, okay, how do we certify this so that it passes thermal runaway requirements? That's a separate hard problem. But then I think the final one, which is arguably even more difficult, is how do you manufacture them in large volumes so that they're actually reliable in customers' hands? And so I think it'll be fascinating to see what happens in the aviation world related to that, because the reliability of the batteries has to be so good when these actually go out into the commercial world. But most of the companies will potentially have only produced, 24 different batteries prior to certification. So hopefully there'll be a lot of information sharing between folks like Zero and the automotive world around how to address that problem.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all. Alex, if you want to say any last words, I feel like we were just getting into some discussion here. We need more time, but
yeah, that's how I feel
unfortunately-
too. That's how I feel too. And actually, I had it was a question I wanted to ask because I'm a computer science professor, and I want to ask about the software. We're talking about a lot of hardware here, but there's a heck of a lot of software in there too. But I guess we'll have to save that for another panel. And so I just want to thank our panelists for joining today. And it really just whet my appetite for hearing more.
Great. Yes, me too. Thank you, Alex. And on that note, maybe we can highlight maybe more on the software side at next year's DART Symposium, which will be 2022, October 18th through 20th, right around the same time. So we'll keep that in mind for next year.
Good.
Thank you so much, Dean Wolf, and everyone on the panel. We're going to head into our next panel, panel number 2. Where UC Berkeley researcher Adam Cohen's going to help us moderate. He's a researcher in transportation mobility at Berkeley's Institute for Transportation Studies. Adam, please go ahead and lead the panel discussion of the state of affairs in building out and advancing the infrastructure for urban air mobility. This should be interesting.
Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, it's so great to have such a great panel with us today. I'd like to kind of just briefly introduce our panel, and then we'll have each of the panelists kind of introduce themselves and present briefly kind of a few remarks, and then we'll kind of have a moderated discussion. So joining us today, we have Anna Dietrich, co-founder of the Community Air Mobility Initiative, Adrian Lindgren, State and Local Partnership Lead for the Air Mobility Division at Hyundai Motor Company, Chris Zakaria, Senior Program Manager with SAIC, and John Ebert, Chief Technology Officer at ATA LLC. So I'm going to turn it over first to Anna, and then each of the panelists will kind of start with their presentation, then we'll go into our conversation. Thank you.
Hi, Adam. I just thought I would take an opportunity to give a brief introduction into myself and into Cami. I don't have any slides to share. Just wanted to provide a little bit of history. So I came into the space of Fun Weird Things That Fly as the founding chief operating officer for Terra Fugia back in the early 2000s. Our MIT spin-out company working on rotatable aircraft, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, lots of things that were really pushing the bounds of certification and the status quo in aviation. From there, I ended up deciding that the thing that I was most interested in was the regulatory landscape, government affairs, certification strategy, that kind of thing, and moved into my own consulting practice in 2014. As part of that work, I had the opportunity to have a really front row seat for a lot of the work that the industry has been doing at the federal level. So standards development organizations, working on the Hill, working with the FAA, but really not working with the folks that are ultimately going to be responsible for figuring out how to integrate this new technology, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, autonomy, all of these new things that are coming down the pipe from the aviation industry into our communities, and how to do that with the maximum benefit to the maximum number of people. So about 2.5 years ago, Yolanka Wolf and I started the Community Air Mobility Initiative. It's a 501c3 educational nonprofit, so not an industry lobbying organization, really focused on an educational mission to support state and local decision makers with the information and the education and the tools that they need to approach this conversation about how does the future of aviation interact with my neighborhood, with my community in a really constructive way. So that is the focus of CAMI. We run a series of cohorts, the Urban Air Policy Collaborative, which are intensive deep dives into this space. We also have a number of resources published on our website, and we are really here to support and educate and facilitate bringing this new technology into our communities and our neighborhoods in a mindful way that's going to have the maximum long-term benefit.
Thank you for that introduction, Anna. Adrian, would you like to kind of share a little bit about kind of what you're doing over at Hyundai?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can share a couple of slides here. Just give a little background. So I'm Adrienne Lindgren from Hyundai Air Mobility. I'm based in Los Angeles. I've been working in this space for a few years now. My background is in transportation planning and urban planning. Here at Hyundai, I'm kind of showing something on the screen here. We are really interested in integrating AAM, UAM into our vision for cities that are powered through multimodal e-mobility innovation. And just quickly, sort of, I wondered when I got into Hyundai, how did we end up here? Hyundai actually started in transportation infrastructure, building highways after World War II, and moved into vehicles in the 60s. And then really in the 2000s, 2010s to present, has really been making a lot of investments across a number of different technologies related to electrification, automation, robotics. And this is really, we see sort of air mobility as part of a integrated ground air service that can be offered to really help contribute to optimizing mobility within cities. We are making a long-term commitment. We've committed about $1.5 billion into this space. Again, really with the mandate from our chairman to build human-centered cities that leverage all of these different advancements in technology, innovation, solutions to really approach mobility from the perspective of how do we deliver the most affordable and universal mobility system possible. So meeting everyone at their needs and where they need to be met. And then finally, I'll just say where we sort of lie within the marketplace. We are focused on three primary use cases between two aircraft, and eVTOL eSTOL. So that includes urban air mobility, slightly shorter routes, a little bit lower in terms of passenger throughput, regional air mobility up to about 20 passengers, and using a similar vehicle first as actually a cargo operation that we see as integrating into logistics platforms. And really from an infrastructure perspective, we're really hoping to develop and partner with different types of entities, both public and private, to develop infrastructure that is as functional and multifunctional and diverse as possible. How can we support as many modes? And how can we also look at this infrastructure as potential benefits to communities, both from an economic development perspective, but as potential sites for increasing energy resilience in communities, increasing digital network connectivity. So thank you so much, Adam, for having us here today, and to the folks at DART. Looking forward to participating.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And Chris, would you like to kind of do a brief introduction and share any slides if you have any?
Hi, am I audible? Great. So my name is Chris Sequeira. I'm with SAIC, and I'm also the founder and principal of a company called CJSC LLC. But here I'm representing SAIC, and the reason is because SAIC, though perhaps the name doesn't really ring a bell in terms of UAM and UAS and other electric technologies, SAIC is a major partner to the Federal Aviation Administration for essentially building digital infrastructure. And you can see here on the screen, many SAIC employees are former FAA employees, and that includes me. I spent 10 years or 6 years at the FAA, 10 years total in the industry, just a little over 10 years, and I'll get to that in a second. So part of my reason for being here is to talk about how the things that we're discussing in this symposium really rely on the importance of digital infrastructure. And so SAIC is a major supporter to the FAA in terms of its digital systems, and that includes all manner of air traffic control and management systems, from the air traffic equipment infrastructure all the way up to air traffic controller training. SAIC has a role in all of those. And in terms of my background and what is the connection between SAIC and somebody with an environmental and community engagement background like mine, well, I am a member of CAMI's Expert Contributor Network. And as a matter of fact, Anna and I know each other back from MIT. I started my career really in the marriage of aviation and the environment. I worked on a research project as a graduate student that was funded by the FAA's Office of Environment and Energy, and looked at how communities were affected by air emissions from aircraft. And that, of course, ties very much into what we're discussing here in this symposium. I then built my career in the realm of environmental policy. And many people may not be aware that the FAA has an entire office, the one I just mentioned, that's specific to environmental policy. And that's not just compliance with environmental regulations, it's all the way to leadership. In fact, that office is the key tip of the spear, if you will, for the United States position at the International Civil Aviation Organization. Most environmental standards for aviation, including noise standards, typically originate at that level, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and that is a body of the United Nations. And then member countries, such as the United States, are then charged with implementing those standards in their respective countries. So everything related to carbon dioxide, CO2 standards, those start at the ICAO level. And so for those of you who are aware of the working groups at ICAO, Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection, and things like CORSIA, the market-based measures mechanism for CO2, all of those begin at ICAO, and the FAA has a key role in that. So I did much of that work for several years. I played key roles in producing environmental standards and updating environmental standards and community engagement standards for FAA's air traffic procedure projects. And that also ties into what we do here in the realm of UAS and UAM. And then I spent about 5 years airport consulting and saw the other side of these issues, serving at airports across the United States of America. A number of the core 30 airports, including JFK and LaGuardia, which I actually live not too far from here in Queens, New York. And I could go on, but I'd just like to say thanks again for the opportunity to be here. And I'm really putting on the hat of somebody who has a background in the marriage of aviation and the environment as a member of this symposium. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Chris. That was a great introduction. John.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me to the symposium. Anna, it's nice to see you again. So yes, I'll introduce myself, and Chris's intro was kind of a nice bookend because he talks about working with ICAO, and I'm kind of working at the other end, about as far away as you can get at sort of state and local government. And so I'm the CTO of a company called ATA LLC. Our core business is data integration and data science. And that's our business. Unmanned systems are my passion. So I'm here today because we are the technology partner of the Commonwealth of Virginia on a program called the Virginia Flight Information Exchange. We just call it Virginia Fix. And that's basically Virginia's project to create an authoritative supplemental data service provider, an ASDSP, for those of you who may not be up on all the latest jargon, that allows state and local government to publish information for use by UAS industry and operators through a common platform. And the nice thing is the data is public, it's open, it's official. Government data may not always be perfect, but at least you can count on it as being official data. And so, as we've gotten into it, what we've kind of learned is that we're sort of filling in, the white space, right? The FAA manned charts are really great, but they kind of peter out below sort of 700 to 1,000 foot AGL because you're really not supposed to be flying your helicopter and your fixed wing aircraft down there. So most of the UAS stuff, even the larger stuff like the UAM, when they come down to land, they're kind of relying on, good guesswork and street maps. And so the idea is that we can start to fill in all of that space with the wealth of data and information that state and local government have. And we've had a lot of fun doing that. And we've actually learned a lot. And we've learned a lot about kind of the governance of this data and what it means in terms of how we configure for local integration of UAS. And so what I'll add, I want to just quickly show a picture. And what this picture is, it's actually a screenshot of the production system. And I actually just posted the link to the public website for it. Now, as part of the program, we integrate FAA USS providers, and to the extent that airframe manufacturers want to get involved, we can integrate them for direct programmatic access to get these data feeds. But there's also a public website if anyone wants to go and play around and look at it. But I'm showing you my hometown of Winchester, Virginia, and showing you the kinds of things that we're working to get out in the hands of industry and operators to help them with safe and effective operations. And so, for example, this little box over here This is the sewage treatment plant. So it's a ground operations prohibited advisory. You're not permitted to land your vehicle in the sewage tanks. I can't imagine why you would want to, but but we just in case it's not clear to you, you really can't land your vehicle. This is the Northwest Regional Detention Center. So a big public safety concern is correctional facilities. They've had problems with small UAS being used for smuggling contraband. So starting to clarify where these facilities are so that, the pilots and the participants in the system, who want to do the right thing can just avoid the property. And frankly, let's say you're doing a survey, on a windy day, you can stay clear of the boundary and not end up crossing into it. Information on schools, there's an obstruction here. That's the town water tower, providing strategic guidance around our class golf local regional airport. So anyway, so very excited about the conversation because, as I mentioned, I'm kind of down in the weeds working with state and local government to get all this data out so that industry can use it. And also, as we've learned, help communities think about how they can use their data footprint to help manage the local integration of UAS. So with that, I'll stop and try not to be too verbose. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We really appreciate it. So we'd like to kind of have a little bit of a conversation here. And I know this first question really could take the entire discussion in its entirety, but what are some of the key opportunities and challenges that you see in order to kind of realize a fully functioning UAM ecosystem?
I'm happy to go first if you'd like, because I've already thought about it. Very briefly, I know from the perspective where I sit, a lot of the communities, they know this is coming. They see it as very Jetsons. They don't really understand how it gets integrated. And so, as I mentioned 30 seconds ago, by working with these communities, we're helping them kind of think about, all right, think about takeoff and landing areas for things like a Joby. Where do you want those to be? How do you respect resident equities? How do you balance access to services with that, right? And then how do you also provide additional information to make sure the flight is safe and efficient? I think a lot of the ground infrastructure for this stuff is kind of there. I mean, when we talk about vertiports and whatnot, that's not the case. But the problem is the infrastructure is not exposed in a way that the locality and the local populace really understand it. And it's not exposed in a way that industry can easily take advantage of it. So I think this getting local government up to speed is the biggest challenge I see. But of course, that's based on where I sit. So that's kind of my thinking, Adam. Thank you.
John, that's definitely where I sit too with Cami, right? So we're very much focused on supporting those same people. And I wanted to echo one of the words you used, which was integration. I think integrating UAM into our existing transportation landscape is really essential for both early sort of rollout as well as long-term success and sustainability of all of this. And you have an opportunity to do that in a mindful way, which is fantastic. The tension that I see in the space right now that I want to just kind of highlight as something that we need to be balancing is, on the one hand, we have an opportunity to be very deliberate about thinking through and rolling out this kind of fully formed long-term, here's a system, right? It's integrated, it's functional, it's the final vision, right? But we aren't there yet in many ways. And I think a more practical way to get started is much smaller bites, much more evolutionary. So while we want to keep that broader, cathedral vision in mind, we don't want to let that stop us from building the bricks, right? So I think it's important to keep that integration in mind, to look for opportunities to do that, to look for small, simple wins with that as we go, and to be mindful about the broader equity considerations, the broader community integration considerations, but also to be willing to just start and to try things and to use our existing general aviation infrastructure for limited use cases for early, sort of test beds almost of how does this actually work. And we're going to learn so much when we start operating with these things. So the sooner we can start doing that at a small scale, I think the better from answering those unknown questions.
I'll chime in. I think you both have really great points. I'll just build on a couple. I think integration with other modes, and I think this, John sort of spoke to this as well, right? It's not a very well articulated vision for AAM right now. There's a lot of, I think, shiny object visualizations even, right? Versus maybe some of the more raw, what does this actually look like when push comes to shove? And so I think there's a lot to be done leveraging visualization technology, simulation technology to help bring this into communities in a more meaningful way. We've been working with urban movement labs in City of LA to just do renders, for example, that re-envision this in a way that's a little bit more, it looks like it could be part of your street, right? And I think that's, when we think about even small wins, those are some of them, working with those community-based organizations to understand what do people want to see around this infrastructure, how they might want to use it, and what might it look like as it integrates with other modes. I would also say the airport network is, I think, critically important and probably doesn't get enough attention. I think it has a tremendous role in the especially early rollout of AAM, and it is where, I think to Anna's point, there are structures in place, there are funding sources in place, right, that can help us address this and start building the use cases as they come onto the market and as the technology evolves and as the regulation evolves. So I would agree. I think we get overwhelmed sometimes by the scope of the task and bringing all of these diverse actors in the ecosystem together, but focusing on what is important to communities and then what is at our disposal and at our disposition to increase in terms of asset utilization is a great founding place to start.
And I certainly resonate with everything that's been said up to this point. And I would add that one of the things that we really have to talk about, not only with members of state, local, and federal government, but with the communities of all sorts themselves, is the existing policy and regulatory constraints that in some sense shape, for good and bad, the conversation around what state and local governments can actually do regarding aircraft operations. So the regulatory landscape around vehicles in flight is very different from the different types of landscapes around, for instance, cars, e-scooters, et cetera, much of which come from state and local levels. Unfortunately, because of federal preemption, in many cases, state and local governments don't have much of a say over how aircraft operate in flight. That ultimately comes down to the jurisdiction of the FAA. So when we talk about this industry, and particularly this idea of scaling UAS and UAM operations up to hundreds or maybe even thousands a day, we're also talking about the need for different types of policy landscapes that are flexible and scalable to meet that type of need, because certainly I can only speak for myself, but I believe that state and local governments would not necessarily be keen on having these operations grow substantially in ways that they don't have much of a voice over. So certainly much of this conversation for me is about bringing the message that there is existing sets of policy constraints, but policy, like law and regulations, are set by people and they can be changed by people, which is one reason why it's important to have these conversations fairly early.
Adam, if you don't mind, I wanted to add a great example of something Chris said, right? To Chris's point about the boundary between federal and state and local. So when we had our first meeting with the Virginia Department of Corrections, literally the first thing they said in the meeting was, we want to prohibit overflight over our facilities, right? Because they've had this contraband problem. And we had to tell them, as a state authority, you are not allowed to do that. Right? And we educated them about what they are allowed to do. So they are allowed to regulate takeoff and landing on their facility and tell a pilot that if they land or touch the facility, right, they're subject to action. They can provide a warning area to warn the pilot. And then, one of the next conversations that the Commonwealth's engaged in is talking to the FAA around how we can share this data in support of Section 2209, right, which starts to get to Chris's point. I just wanted to throw it in because it's such a great example of what he's talking about.
Yeah, John and Chris, those are great examples. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, with all these kind of competing priorities, kind of at the local and state level, and, Chris, you mentioned a number of them, scooters, shared mobility, other modes. With all these kind of competing priorities, How much kind of focus do you see kind of, local and regional and even state government paying kind of attention to advanced air mobility going forward?
I'm happy to chime in here, Adam. I think there's a whole host of different reasons why governments get engaged and involved in this. Some of it's for proactive planning versus reactive planning. Sometimes it's an economic development imperative. And sometimes there's absolutely no interest, right? And to your point, there are a lot of spaces where there are many other priorities that will take place above advanced air mobility. But I think the best way, and one of the things that we're really trying to do, is partner up front and position ourselves as good stewards to public entities, giving a reason why we should be prioritized, right? I think it's to just say that the technology is coming, so you should pay attention to it, doesn't necessarily resonate as well as being able to identify what's the business case, what is the potential upside, and again, how do we potentially position this the infrastructure associated with the operations with positive ROI for communities, and understand what do they need and how can we potentially use this new, which sometimes and in many cases has much higher requirements than other modes, right? How can we use for energy, for example, and digital connectivity, how can we use that as a broader based benefit towards the communities that we seek to serve?
Anna, after you, John.
No, I was just going to say that to your question, Adam, there's a lot of interest with the communities that we've been working with. I think what has been interesting is that, and this is where Anna's work is great, is that there aren't great resources and guidance, right, in terms of what they can do now. And so what they tend to get is they'll get from industry, well, you have to buy $1 million worth of equipment and set up radars. And, it's interesting, Anna talked about small wins, right? That's actually kind of how the fix came about in Virginia, because there was a discussion about, well, we build out a UTM, and everyone said, oh, it's too early, it's too expensive. But what we can do is, provide data. And I think, Adrian, to your point about the public interest and positive benefit, one of the premises of the program is that the data is a public asset. And we've actually had a number of local governments say, we've been approached by private companies that want to put us in their database. We're not interested in that, right? If this is a public service, we're interested in that. And so that aspect of the program has been really important. And so my apologies, I just wanted to add to what she'd said.
No, that's a great point. And, one of the things I wanted to ask Anna is, I know Cami is kind of doing kind of this urban air policy collaborative, as well as a lot of other engagements. How do you see kind of, the public sector kind of balancing these different kind of concerns, and kind of which ones do you think need to be addressed first?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as a side note, thank you so much for your support of that. Adam is one of our main contributors to that collaborative as well. So I think there's, depending on where you are in the country and what your past experience has been, I think there's different levels of priority here and different areas of concern. So there's some places that felt like they got completely swamped with the ground-based ride-hailing services, the Ubers and the Lyfts, and they have a very sort of proactive, I want to get ahead of this one, I'm not going to get caught flat-footed this time approach to it, which is different from places that haven't had a bad experience like that, which maybe are a little bit more wait and see. So I think at this point, Cami's focus, my focus is really on providing those educational tools like the Urban Air Policy Collaborative, like the resources that Cami is producing online. We do an Advanced Air Mobility 101 and AA 101 every year. And to try to equip jurisdictions, kind of no matter where they are in their sense of urgency, with the foundational information that they need to approach these conversations on equal footing. I see that we're headed towards kind of a bifurcation in the decision point without that information of, someone comes to a jurisdiction and says, hey, I want to do this thing. The response without that sort of empowerment is probably either going to be no, please go away, or potentially they might get pushed into something that wouldn't be the long-term best solution because they don't know what questions to ask. So providing that education, I think, is step one, no matter what, and that will allow us to then tackle some of these bigger picture questions about long-term planning and how does this integrate with existing transit projects, and how do we address the equity conversation, which, as a side note, I like to think of it as equity in terms of balancing the benefits and the negative impacts. So making sure that the communities that would be bearing whatever, hopefully minimal, but whatever negative impacts there might be, are getting the same share of the benefit of this, as opposed to one part of the community getting the benefit and the other part getting the negative impacts. So in my mind, that's how I want to approach that equation. So that requires some deliberate thought at this point as we lay those foundations. That's part of that educational mission.
Yeah, equity is a really important issue that's come up in a lot of different contexts, everything from, economic development to, impacts around vertiports, positive and negative, revitalization, also, congestion, gentrification. What are kind of, for the panel, what are the key kind of equity opportunities and challenges do you see kind of starting up this ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm happy to hop in, and I apologize because I was called away for about 10 minutes there. So I apologize if what I'm about to say has already been said, but a couple of things come to mind for me from the policy landscape. First of all, I've sat in a number of the NASA AAM working group meetings. The Community Integration Working Group is my favorite one, no surprise there. And I've noticed that there's much attention being brought to the importance of equity, of reduced environmental impacts, particularly noise, of state and local integration. But then when I read the FAA's concept of operations for UAM, as well as the NASA concept of operations, I saw, and this is my interpretation from the policy perspective, I saw that much of those concerns were not actually built into the concept of operations. So even the system diagram itself, the enterprise architecture, if you will, did not actually embed mechanisms for state and local stakeholders to have a voice in the operation of the system. So the first thing I would say about equity is that if we're going to talk about opportunities for state and local governments to have a say in how these technologies are operated, make sure that those mechanisms are actually built into the system, especially at this early stage where we're talking about formalizing processes and procedures. It's very important to raise those topics at this time and really in forums such as these, the forum that we're attending right now. So that's the first thing that I would say, which is to really systematize and make concrete these types of values that we're talking about. And the other thing that I would talk about, building on what's been said about balancing opportunities and impacts, it reminds me of things that have gone on here in New York City, where for many years, the institution City Bike was criticized for focusing its bike share system primarily in higher end neighborhoods in Manhattan. And of course, the rationale was, well, that's where the people with money are. That's the people using this pay by the hour, pay by the half hour type of system. But the focus where the revenue was left out, shall we say, the other 4/5 of the city. And so City Bike, after much criticism at many levels by non-government organizations, by elected officials, et cetera, has started to build out and expand to other places in the city, and in some cases provide benefits, provide financial benefits to increase participation in the network. And similarly, one of the concerns that I have, and we could raise this with services such as Uber and Lyft and e-scooters and other types of things, is that institutions that might get the impacts could, I'm sorry, not institutions, but communities, neighborhoods that could get the impacts could be seen as almost a passover or flyover types of communities, neighborhoods, where they get the impacts of vehicles passing by, but are not able to participate in actually accessing those forms of transportation because of the cost and other things like that. And so there's certainly equity from the participation perspective in terms of actually being able to access these vehicles as riders, but there's also equity to think of from the workforce perspective. So, and this was talked about earlier, in terms of mechanics, pilots, other types of operators. These are also levels of equity to talk about in terms of being able to access these technologies in a variety of ways, and not just being passed through or flown over, as the case might be, getting the impacts but not the benefits.
Thanks, Chris. That was a really great summary. We're getting a little bit close to our end of our time here for the panel. Are there any kind of final remarks that the panelists would like to make?
Adam, I'm sorry, Adrian, go ahead. I'll go first and then I'm done. First of all, Chris, absolutely echo pretty much all of what you said, right? But there were some things that really stood out there. I think your point that the UTM and AAM ConOps are right now, they're very tech centric, and they kind of don't really treat enough with the human and policy aspects of integration. Couldn't agree more with that. Again, the work that we're doing here in Virginia has really highlighted that a lot, that there's a lot of discussion about AI and comms and whatnot, and really short shrift on, well, how do you integrate this stuff? The other thing I'd like to echo, again, Anna's point about small wins. It's so critical. They're so doable, and you don't have to necessarily get commitments for enormous amounts of funding to deliver things. And I think another point, Chris, that you made, was about how the equity gets shared and who benefits. And, again, I'll share another anecdote. I was at the Regional Airport Authority board meeting a few weeks ago, and, I'm the designated drone guy. And one of the things somebody said is, how do the public views the regional airport as a place for rich people to go play with their toys. And how do we change that? And I think the presentations we've heard today with these next generation vehicles and air mobility has the chance to really democratize these airports, and as a result, rejuvenate them. So I think we're in a very exciting time, and there's a lot that we can do, and it's not even that far away. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and kind of speaking to the equity question. I think, first of all, I think there is this is one of the ways that airports, I think to John's point, is really important, right? You tend to see, at least Southern California, you do see an overlap between places that were sort of left behind in the last transportation revolution around highways, tend to coincide with where you have airports, but often are underutilized, right? Based on a lack of available technology that has less impacts in those communities. So I think it's one of the really great use cases in terms of trying to bring a different lens of equity to the conversation. The other I'll just say candidly is that there is a bit of a tension between I think affordability and accessibility and the pace of market scaling. And as we scale the market, right, you end up bringing the overall price point down of everything, making it more accessible. And so I think part of the trick here is how do we get to those early wins, to Anna's point, and how do we also keep the idea of long-term planning in mind so that we can get to a point where this is the most accessible form of transportation as possible, and now on par with current transportation in terms of cost. Thanks so much for everything today.
Yeah, absolutely, Adrian. I mean, there's going to be an entry to service period here that may not be as accessible as we'd like to see ultimately for everybody. And I think that's a pattern that we've seen play out in other new things, right? Everything from introduction of the automobile to smartphones to, you name it, right? New technology often starts small and rather expensive. But if we are paying attention as we get into that, and we start off headed in the right direction, and a few degrees difference at that beginning will play out into broad differences at the end. I think we can get where we all kind of want this to go and have the intention of it bringing a lot of value to a lot of people. So yeah, echo everything you said.
And Chris, any final concluding remarks?
I would just say thanks again for the opportunity to be here. I certainly agree with what's been said. Sorry again that I had to hop out for about 10 minutes or so, but hoping to continue growing relationships with all the people on this call and with Monterey Bay DART.
Terrific. Well, again, thank you to all of our panelists who participated in the conversation today. And thank you to Monterey DART for kind of hosting this outstanding session as always. Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to the panel. Gosh, this was such a rich discussion and honestly just so hard for me to wrap my head around the complexity of the process. And it's so important. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to panel number 3 here, air mobility opportunities and challenges. Jeremy Abate, what an honor for DART to pique your interest and gain your engagement with us today. Please go ahead and lead this panel discussion and thinking about what does the air mobility future look like on both a technical and a human level.
Great, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to kind of facilitate this discussion. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me and see me. Is that the case?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
I am, like we said, I'm the publisher of Scientific American Magazine. And usually when I start a discussion like this, I hold up the first issue of Scientific American, which was published in 1845. And right before this event, I couldn't find, I have a facsimile of the one from August of 1845, but on the cover of the magazine, our first issue, 175 years ago, was a train car, a newly renovated train car for the nascent industrial United States to showcase really what was going to be several transportation revolutions that would occur. And today we're going to be talking about revolution in air mobility, kind of 100 years after the first wave of aviation. I'm also thrilled to be joined by a illustrious panel, and I am going to quickly introduce them if they're on screen. I can't actually see them yet, but hopefully we'll be able to shortly.
Panelists, go ahead and raise your hand so you can come to the front of the viewer. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I'm joined by Rajesh Sengupta, Professor of Systems Engineering and Transportation at UC Berkeley.
I can't turn my camera on. It says the host has stopped the camera.
There you are.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Your camera's not on, then that's a magic technology because I can see you. Also joined by Vanessa Ventura, Human Factors Engineer at Joby Aviation. And last but certainly not least, Keith Nilsson, Managing Partner at Explorer Capital. And we hope to have a great discussion. I really want to jump in, we don't have too much time, and really kind of talk about everyone's vision of what the future of air mobility looks like, particularly as we dive into urban air mobility and the opportunities and challenges there. For several generations, we have been, thinking about this vision of flying cars, of getting from one point to another above the urban landscape. We feel like we're certainly near the cusp of a truly transformative moment in UAM, but I come from the world of science journalism, and in science journalism, we tend to not want to use certain words for fear that they might create undue hype around a discipline or a technology. Some of those words are groundbreaking. Some of those words are revolutionary. Some of those, game-changing, I would include in that. And yet, here we are, I feel, at the cusp of something new. I certainly witnessed Joby Aviation's aircraft in front of the New York Stock Exchange last summer, and to much hubbub. And Vanessa, I'd love to just kind of start with you from where you sit in this industry. Someone who is charged with really looking at how these human factors can be overcome to make sure we have this new era of transportation. What do you feel is the biggest opportunity, and are we on the cusp of a revolution? And certainly, what do you feel are also the most important challenges that we need to overcome to move forward here?
Thank you, Jeremy, for that introduction. Yeah, so hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Ventura, Human Factors Systems Engineer at Joby Aviation. Our team provides support during the design of our aircraft by using various methodologies, such as rapid prototyping and participant evaluations, to develop, validate, and verify our requirements. A large focus of our team is supporting the aircraft design, items like the landing gear, the door handles, passenger restraints, the cabin floor, the pilot's mission displays, and the much lauded pilot cup holder are all evaluated and tested by our team. While in parallel, we're trying to take into consideration ground and flight operations, while also laying a foundation for future autonomous functionality. While the design of our aircraft and our flight deck is understanding the interaction at play between our pilots and passengers, we're also trying to take into account the experiences independently from one another. And that's incredibly valuable to our team. In parallel, our team is actively partnered with our general ground operations team to support Skyport and general UAM infrastructure. And so we're currently trying to understand how ground crew interacts with our pilots and passengers, and how this new Skyport and terminal will be part of our tomorrow and part of our today. And so that's what we're trying to assess with all these evaluations. It's a very exciting time to be able to work in this space of electric aircraft.
I can only imagine the excitement from what you do and from the company and the partnerships. Again, you know, I'm gonna throw this over to Keith for kind of an opening statement on this topic. And before you start, Keith, you may not be old enough to remember this, but I certainly am. The hype around the Segway, the two-wheeled personal mobility vehicle that was hyped to transform how mobility and the urban landscape were to work together for people. Never really found its killer app, never really found its, you know, kind of one major area to disrupt, but certainly it was heralded as something that was truly transformative. I don't want to lead your opening statement, but I would love it from a financial perspective, from someone who seems to always be right there for when the big thing is hitting, and really understanding the scalability of you know, commerce, right? And how technology allows for new areas of consumer engagement. How do we make sure we don't have this hype, right? I mean, your job is to make sure you're investing in something that will have a return. So where do you see the opportunity, and what do you look for to make sure that you are avoiding and overcoming the challenges?
Jeremy, thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. Keith Nilsson. I'm older than you may think, so I remember the Segway very well, and the initial hype and enthusiasm that came with the initial Segway's launch. I do think drones are in a very different space. I think you have to be an optimist by nature to be in the venture capital space. Otherwise, it's hard to invest in just about anything. But I am very optimistic and positive about drone adoption. I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to be an inflection point for drone adoption, driven by a number of things. First, and perhaps the most important, is regulatory. There isn't as much regulatory risk in some of the emerging markets and outside of the US, and we've already seen widespread drone adoption in those kinds of markets. If you just apply the kinds of use cases that could be here in the US and other developing markets, clearly, I think there's a very bright future in drone adoption. So we think over the next couple of years, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when the FAA, both in Europe and in the US and other developing markets, are going to fully type certify drones, but we think it's going to be in the next couple of years. And with that, we're going to see a host of use cases of BVLOS drone capabilities in logistics and medical deliveries, in a whole host of surveillance, security, and other categories in a very meaningful way, and that gets us very excited. The second key factor in, I think, really driving drone adoption going forward is this whole trade-off of performance capabilities, range capabilities, and payload capabilities of drones. and the curves are all heading up and to the right, so to speak. And in the not so distant future, we're gonna have drones flying more than 100 miles with 20-pound payloads that will be under 50 or so pounds. And that kind of capability opens up a number of use cases that are far more efficient than driving a 25,000-pound UPS or FedEx truck on over 50 miles or so. So we're quite excited about that. And we just think the productivity and efficiency of using drones, which can deliver and cents on the dollar relative to the way that current logistics work, is only going to open use cases going forward. So we're optimistic. We're leaning in heavily. We're an investor in a number of drone companies. We were an early investor in Zipline. We're an investor in Wingcopter. We're an investor in Gather, Area 17, others. So we're leaning into the space. We think the next 3 to 5 years are going to be really interesting, and we're buckling in for the ride.
You are a professional optimist, and that is a great place to be. And it sounds to me, Keith, like it's those points at which the technology is, these benchmarks of efficiency that are guide where you see the new era, right? And I'm going to go back 10 years to when genomic sequencing became something that could be under $1,000 and done by a machine that could fit on a desktop. And at that moment, that was the moment people said, okay, genomics is not just this academic pursuit that costs billions of dollars that the NIH has to do. It could be something done by your physician in his or her office to give you a picture of your entire genomic makeup. Similarly, it sounds like once technology efficiencies reach a certain level, then you start saying, this is an industry that can scale. This is an industry with wide adoption possibilities. I want to revisit that regulatory kind of topic you brought up later in the discussion, but I want to throw it over to my friend Raja, who in a pre-call yesterday was more than excited from his car about this topic, ironically from his car, talking about transportation beyond automobiles. Raja, it's great to have you here. You have certainly seen how this topic, interplays with the history of humanity and innovation, right? And I think I heard you at a talk a while back that I looked at, where you said that for so much of human history, we can only go as fast as our legs could take us. And certain incremental technologies, say the chariot, even the balloon, right, gave us the ability to do these, to beat out our natural limitations. But it was only recently that we had something as amazing as aviation to make the world a smaller place. We are now seemingly on the cusp of a whole new era of aerospace ingenuity. Are we going to get there? Should we be excited about this? What are the opportunities? And of course, what do you see are the big challenges?
Thank you, Jeremy. It is a real pleasure to be here. And let me see if I can get to that. So you're quite right, I mean, aviation has truly been a marvelous thing. What was once a migration, when I came from as a young Indian man to the shores of the United States, at one point in my life, it would have been a migration. Today, the migration can be a vacation for my family from India who come to visit me. And that is the gift of aviation. I am a professor at UC Berkeley. And I'll start with a little bit about my institution, Jeremy, and then I'll go to some of the things that you asked about. So UC Berkeley is in the midst of aero expansion. And it's not just UC Berkeley, but Governor Davis created in the UC system, the Centers for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society. And the Berkeley campus, the Davis campus, the Merced campus, and UC Santa Cruz have come together to create a new aerospace initiative. And so there is a lot happening. We are building a new 36-acre aerospace campus at NASA Ames. And, interestingly enough, I think this should create some interest, I hope. We are trying to figure out what is going to be the transportation solution from the Berkeley campus to the Moffett campus, which is 90 minutes on a good day. And, so we said, some of us said UAM, somebody else said, no, we should start a ferry, right? So that's the kind of question that we need to answer. So aerospace is in the lifeblood of the state of California. And we've been thinking a lot as a UC professor at the state level. So old aerospace is in Southern California, General Atomics, Grumman, etc. But there's also a new aerospace in Southern California. And certainly new aerospace has now come to Northern California, right? There's Joby, there's Universal Hydrogen, there's Reliable, and many other companies. What we are trying to do across these campuses, having come together in the aerospace initiative, is we are trying to build a value proposition for California industry, right? So what can we as academia do in such a way that carries this industry forward in the state of California? So if any of you have ideas, please get in touch. You Google my name and you will find all my contact information, right? Okay, now to get to the topic at hand, there has been between, I think, surface transportation and the car, right? The automotive revolution and aviation, a historic compact that has lasted, I think, 100 years. So if you go back, Igor Sikorsky founded the Sikorsky Helicopter Company in 1923 with a capital investment of $5 million. His first major success was the S-38 flying boat, which was used by Pan Am, right? That was really the first operation that Pan Am ran. It was also used by the military. Henry Ford founded the Ford Motor Company in and then the Model T came out in 1908 and sold millions over 20 years, right? Now, from that point on, if we look at the trajectory of these two industries, aviation took interurban mobility and the automobile took urban mobility. And this is where the two have sat, and sometime in the 50 to 500 mile segment, they intersect. You can drive from San Francisco to LA, right? Or you can fly from San Francisco to LA. Now, this historic compact, so the success of the automobile in the urban mobility market, right? So Henry Ford is often credited with, that he's the man who decided that you want to mass produce the automobile, and it should be at a price point that the Ford worker can purchase. But I think the real genius of Henry Ford is not that. The real genius of Henry Ford is that he persuaded all of us to launch the largest public investment program in the history of civilization. And that is the public investment program that rebuilt everything we had done to put every American home on a motorable road. And this is essentially the greatness and success of Henry Ford. So when I look at the fact that my home is on this motorable road, I think Henry Ford. Everywhere I look around, I see Henry Ford, Henry Ford. I'm a Henry Ford obsessed guy, right? Now, this 100-year impact, compact between these two industries, right, is now, let us say, I think this urban air mobility, I view it in that context. But first, the stable interurban aviation market, right, has an existential threat now. That existential threat is sustainability, right? So Europe has already started outlawing flights of various kinds and saying that this has to be high-speed rail. And of course, San Francisco to New York will remain a flight, but or San Francisco to London will remain a flight, but it will become a dirty word, right? You eco-criminal, is this what you just did? Right? So, but today's market is more about today's panel is more about urban air mobility and advanced air mobility. So let me come to that. So at the same time, I ask, what is this urban air mobility or advanced air mobility, right? So urban air mobility, that term connoted the carrying of people, and advanced air mobility is over the goods and people, right? The last mile drone delivery market, from my view as a university professor, has already happened. Right, so that market has happened and it's going to happen, and Keith was completely on target with all his remarks about that, right? So Wing has come up on 100,000 deliveries. Mana is doing 2,000 to 3,000 deliveries a day in Ireland, and it's 90% cheaper. And also, as Keith was pointing out, it's also greener. Every time I drive my SUV to buy a gallon of milk from the local supermarket, I moved 1 ton of metal to get a gallon of milk. The carbon emissions are 300 times worse than doing it by a drone, right? So what is the next frontier, right? The next frontier is about people, right? Now here, if urban air mobility is going to come out, take aviation out of its classical interurban market and move into the urban market, urban air mobility must have a value proposition on the landscape of urban mobility. Now, when I think of the early days when Uber Elevate gave a report, they said they would have 1,000 four-seater aircraft in each of 3 markets. Now, 1,000 four-seater market, 3 trips an hour, 10 hours a day, is about 40,000 people per day. The Bay Area has 4 million commute trips a day. You move 40,000 people in this area, you are elevating the Ubermensch. You move the 1%, and sometimes you attract the attention of the 99%. And this is not good for you. So I very much like the way that Joe Ben, the CEO of Joby, talks about it. Every time he talks in the news, he talks about it as this is something for everybody.
Yeah.
Now you start moving 10%, that is 400,000 people, right? Then you're moving as many people as BART. And then you are moving the middle class. And nobody can tell you to get out, right? It's much harder to tell you to get out. So so my research with NASA over the past couple of years has been on the total addressable market. And we came up with things like in the Bay Area with current, everything remaining as it is current, you could move about 250,000 people by urban air mobility if you built about 100 vertiports. That's about 2,500 people per vertiport, which sounds about right to me. And there's of course a law of diminishing returns after about 60 vertiports. And one of the things that Joby says we want to start point to point. And so I hope when UC Berkeley talks about a Moffett Berkeley Airlink, somebody will be interested in joining us.
Yeah.
Finally, airspace, the private sector build aircraft, but airspace is a public-private business. It's always a public-private business, and California must do its part. The Ford Model T came out in 1908, and in 1910, California issued an 18 million highway bond measure to build one of the first highway systems in the world. That's one of the reasons we have a $1.5 trillion economy today, right? The UC system is one of the largest landowners in the state of California. So as we discuss a airlink from the Davis campus to the Merced campus, or the Berkeley campus to the Moffett campus, the UC system alone, I think, has the ability to, by being a landowner, to provide the tip of the spear for California to get this thing started. And, if aviation goes into the urban market, it's a very, very large disruption because the scales are completely different, right? So in 2018, there were 1,700 aircraft delivered globally, but there were 75 million cars, right? Boeing's revenue was 100 billion in 2018, Airbus 80 billion in 2019, but Toyota was 275 billion in 2019, and Volkswagen 250 billion. US aviation passenger miles were 760 billion in 2019, but our vehicle miles were 3.2 trillion in 2019.
Yeah.
The scales are completely different.
That's a great point. I mean, I'd love to pick up on this point, and there's a lot to unpack, Raja. Thank you. The democratization of this technology, the idea of doing it for not just the 1%, those efficiencies that Keith brought up. I want to talk quickly, Vanessa. Your company needs a lot of partners, right? You've got amazing technology, but you also need to reach out and collaborate. I know you are the kind of human factor engineer, but there's this societal factor that we need to bring into this, right? Many years ago, in the early 2000s, there was talk of the hydrogen economy, the ability for cars to run on clean hydrogen to replace fossil fuels. And though there were a few challenges like getting the hydrogen, which needed to crack carbon, the infrastructure was kind of was overwhelming. Having governments produce these fueling stations all across America. How do we ensure that these vertiports, that these stations will be built, and how does industry work hand in hand with local, state, international policymakers to make sure this happens?
That's a really good question, Jeremy. Thank you. So, for example, currently the way that Joby is approaching it is because the Joby aircraft can take off and land vertically, it only requires light infrastructure as compared to conventional airplanes. The Joby aircraft can utilize existing aviation infrastructure, such as taxiways, ramps, helipads at airports and heliports of airport, and new infrastructure. The new infrastructure could be composed of repurposing existing infrastructure to allow for Joby operations and building new greenfield sites, purposely built for aircraft operations. Is this charging infrastructure always required? No. The aircraft can operate over 150 miles within a 30-minute VFR reserve on a single charge, but Joby is estimating that the average trip length will be 25 miles or less. Therefore, it's not expected that charging will be needed between every single flight. When we look at this infrastructure and we think of how many skyports we'll be possibly seeing in our cities, we think it's a minimal network of 2 high-demand nodes that can provide substantial value to travelers, introducing a zero-emission alternative and saving people valuable time on a high congestion corridor. Increasing the number of skyports provides more and more people with a faster trip options, with network efficiencies enabling faster service and lower fare prices over time. In an ideal world, you brought up regulations. In an ideal world, in preparation to launch the service at commercial service airports in select cities by 2024, the Joby aircraft would operate to and from commercial airline terminals and to provide our passengers with the quickest connection between their ultimate origins and destinations. The Joby passengers will include origin and destination connecting airline passengers, as well as people from areas surrounding the airport. And so as a result, there's a trade-off between the convenience of locating landing sites with airside connections versus the accessibility of landside, parking side locations. In some cases, we think both options may be possible or even optimal. The airplane with vertical takeoff and landing capabilities is expected to be certificated under Part 23, and Joby's service will be conducted under Part 135 rules, integrating into the existing national airspace system and existing airport operations and avoiding the flow of instrument flight rules, traffic as much as possible. With respect to airside landing sites, there are some interesting challenges to think through with respect to baggage and TSA. Special consideration should be taken regarding the location of domestic versus international departures and arrivals or airline check-in baggage claim areas. And with this TSA screening is not required for Part 135 operations, whether the site is on the air side or on the land side, or the secure or non-secure portions of an airport, security is an important consideration, and that's what makes our city safer. Safety and efficiency are 2 of Joby's infrastructure-focused areas. As a vertical takeoff and landing capable aircraft, the Joby aircraft can operate from final approach and takeoff areas, and a minimal taxi distance between them and parking stands is highly desired while maintaining a high depth throughput. So we're hoping that this effect and overall will not disturb cities and will be actually beneficial. And like our motto says, is that we're trying to save 1 billion people an hour a day.
That's an amazing goal. I'd like to also throw this question to Keith a bit to think about investments that are not just on the technology side, but those cities and regions and municipalities that also need allies and technology and policy to help shape a nascent industry here, whether it's mobility technologies to help streets become safe. Are these technologies going to be effective? Are they going to be distributed equitably? Which is again something that I think is inherent in the idea of democratizing this technology. So is it just as important to be investing in that infrastructure and also maintaining relationships with all of these policymakers at every level so that we can grow this industry in an intelligent way and make sure that it is sustainable?
Jimmy, that's a great question. I think there probably should be an entire panel just on that particular topic. It's been, I happen to be a pilot, so I'm very familiar with the airspace rules that apply to general and commercial aviation. The drone world doesn't have those same standards, and it's a little bit of a free-for-all. You have federal, state, municipal organizations. You've got various nonprofit organizations. Some cities are more proactive than others. And I happen to believe that this is a space where you're going to have more tops-down control of drones that really applies policies more broadly that states and municipalities can start to adopt. I haven't seen a push to do that. I think the FAA is being a little bit hands off, even though they are controlling the aircraft themselves. I think from a airspace policy, they have been more hands off than I think they need to be. And so, you know, from an investor perspective, we've looked at dozens of companies that are trying to provide infrastructure, airspace policies, airspace control. And it's very difficult from an investment perspective to bet on any one solution because there are so many unknowns out there about what direction a city or a state or the federal government is going to take for drone adoption with respect to airspace use policy. You know, I caught the tail end of the last panel where, you know, I saw some nice maps on creating some restricted areas, and we need to create some more standards around that, just like we do in general aviation. And I think the more that we can get to standards across all municipality, the faster that we can start to have commercial drone organizations start to operate within those parameters. Until then, it's going to be messy. We have lots of pilot cases going on all over the country, but there aren't official standards. And we, while we certainly invest into unknown categories, that feels like a space that it's really hard to predict how it's going to evolve or who is going to be driving the outcomes there, which is why we haven't invested in any companies that are really driving the infrastructure or the use case policies for any aviation, whether it's air taxis or drones for commercial logistics or other uses. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just a great topic. I think it's of paramount importance, and we seem to be making more progress on the technology and performance of drones than we are on the use cases and the infrastructure and the policies that are going to drive the adoption of these technologies going forward.
That's a common theme, it seems, within any technology. You know, you have the evolution of the technology itself, and then you know, for better or worse, you have a regulatory system that grows to adapt to it. That's maybe not always the best way, but if you look at things like, you know, biotech and gene therapy and other areas where technology is sometimes ahead of any type of regulatory map, be it national, international, state, that sometimes is the case. And, you know, Raja, I'll throw it back to you to kind of talk about the relationship between the regulatory framework and the exciting technologies and companies that are poised to transform these landscapes, be they urban, be they rural, what have you, in the world of aviation. Are we heading for years of messiness, different state rules? We can't even decide in this country if marijuana should be legal, and that's a state by state thing. What are the challenges on a regulatory harmonization level that you see could be hindering and or fueling this industry?
Thank you for that, Jeremy. If I may, I'm going to be the naysayer. Before I go to the regulatory part, I want to say something, apropos the comments that Vanessa made from Joby, right? So, that's a beautiful vision. It's wonderful. And Joby's technological achievements are completely groundbreaking. But I'll say this and say this again. Urban air mobility is an idea pushed by people who've drunk the Kool-Aid. Urban air mobility has to make a value proposition on the landscape of urban mobility. When I go and tell people I want a UAM link from Berkeley to Moffett, they say, why don't you build a ferry? The energy footprint of a flight from Berkeley to Moffett will never beat the Toyota Prius. It will never beat the Toyota Prius, no matter what you do. And in an era of sustainability, that question is going to come up. And this is the kind of thing that I think about, and I wish that people like Joby who are entering with vertically integrated solutions would think about these things. For instance, I wonder that if one of the good ways of doing it is to bundle all this together with high-speed rail in order to increase the catchment area of high-speed rail. I thought of this as, I did a study on, what if I open a UAM corridor over the Bay Bridge and take 10% of the traffic off the Bay Bridge? Because then I get to say, look, UAM benefits not just the people who take it, but the people who don't take it, and is therefore entitled to be financed in a public-private model, just like BART, right? The problem though is that yes, even if I save 50% of the time to cross the Bay Bridge, there's still the driving time from Piedmont to Emeryville, where my vertiport would be, and the driving time from the Transbay terminus, assuming I put the vertiport on the roof there, to the office. And when I did the whole driving time calculations, when I did all that, there's no more than a 10-minute saving. And then they're without their car, right? So, I feel like these are the problems that that need to be thought about. Urban air mobility needs to make a value proposition on the landscape of urban mobility.
Yeah, and that value proposition is going to come from several different parts of the ecosystem, a policy landscape, perhaps like you mentioned, an integration. It's going to be kind of an integrated technology.
Yeah, and so now I want to get to what Keith was talking about in the regulatory side, right? So Keith is completely right about the problem, right? And he says, look, there's all this technological advance, and we can't get it into the sky, right? And then he says we need to harmonize. The place I take issue with Keith is that when he asks for harmony and federal regulation, I think he's shooting himself in the foot. What he should be praying for is complete disharmony, a total jungle where there are no rules, and he can move forward with his companies and his stuff and do whatever he feels like, right? See, when we federalize everything, right, we by definition, the one federal regulator is by definition the most risk-averse party in the entire country. It is easier to put a 1-ton autonomous car on the roads in America than a 55-pound drone in the air. And tell me what's more dangerous, right? And this is because autonomous driving is regulated by the states, and the states compete. If we want to move this thing forward, we need to create a situation like Henry Ford, when he said, I want a Detroit-Cleveland mail delivery service. And he told his guys, pay every senator from coast to coast until this gets done. If you give it to the local mayor, some of them will go forward. You give it to the governor, some of them will go forward. We federalize it, this industry is dead. This is my take on it. I disagree with all the people continuously going to the FAA and say, put all the local governments out of business.
Yeah, no, I think history has precedents that would verify your perspective here. And I don't know, Keith, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, or, I'd love to, and perhaps I'm a little biased because I'm a general aviation pilot. I know that I can get in a plane and fly from point A to B unencumbered because I know the parameters. If I don't know the parameters, then I potentially fly over zones that I'm not supposed to, fly over military zones, fly over. There are a number of problems. I'm not talking about overregulation, so that sounded like that's what you're looking for. If we can just provide a framework that all cities can adopt that says, okay, airports are off limits within these areas. There are certain corridors that need to be operated around certain sensitive zones. And in all other places, open airspace, you can completely fly unencumbered up to a certain altitude. With a very limited set of parameters that everybody can operate, then companies like ours can say, okay, those are the parameters. Now let's go and exploit those to the max of the commercial capability. So I am by no means trying to restrict down to backyards or parking lots or anything else. I'm trying to provide a very high level framework that as companies, we know that we can operate, because today we don't have that flexibility or capability or knowledge.
You need parameters to understand freedom. To paraphrase John Coltrane, the rules so you can break them, and that's where the art of this comes in. And perhaps I'm taking this to a different level. But let me just I want to bring it back to Vanessa, because one of the questions that have come up is this human factor, and hand in hand with the regulatory landscape is the human perception of risk landscape. And when I think about, again, in your title, Vanessa, human factors, risk perception among consumers, risk perception among pilots, what are the most kind of important human factors that you're dealing with right now as you advance your technology and as you advance collaborative discussions to move this industry forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jeremy. There are a bunch of stakeholders in this consideration. As I mentioned earlier, we have a couple when we're actually going through the design of the aircraft. And so while we're designing the aircraft, we have 4 primary stakeholders that we constantly maintain a close-knit interaction with, those being the pilots, passengers, ground crew, and maintenance personnel. These stakeholders are essential in ensuring that the design can support our operations, especially in a, I hate to use the word, Jeremy, but revolutionary space such as UAM, where the play between skyports and a fleet of eVTOL and commuter spaces can be a bit risky for some people. And for us, we're trying to ensure that we mitigate all these as much as possible. We actually currently have a program right now where we're using different aircrafts to test out our theories, to look at with the Joby aircraft, with the sound of drones, the frequency that we're looking at. You can look at our Joby videos where we're looking at the sound that will be placed in these communities where we're flying over homes. We've assessed that other companies have to find different routes to be able to fly over because it becomes a nuisance to the communities where single family homes are affected by these sounds. And so looking for a frequency, I've heard it time and time again where some people are like, I hate the sound of a helicopter. Please, I don't want to hear that over my house every day, 10 times an hour. And for Joby, that's something that we're really, really keen on drilling into and ensuring that the communities that we do place these vertiports in feel safe and secure and comforted. And so that's what we're focusing on. And so for example, even at the vertiport, the first contact point of the vehicle being the doors, where understanding the use cases. Who opens the door? Who can open the door? What happens if someone opens the door during flight? Paralleling a vehicle design as much as possible for this commuter aircraft, we strive to ensure that the door handle was designed to start the journey off with ease, deviating as little as possible from well-known handle designs to allow for a comfortable, safer commute. So that's some of the things that we're taking into consideration.
Well, that's amazing. You know, there's so much that goes into assessing how this technology is going to be sustained, how it's going to grow. I wanted to take some questions. We are like 2 minutes from time. But, you know, I do see there's a question about, you know, could we fly directly over railways, such as Caltrain, and then land 50 feet away in a large parking lot? I've been thinking a lot about the idea of using, you know, the whole idea of integration that Raja brings up. And I think back to when the telegraph had to be spread across the country, we already had a system because of the railways and because we had cleared places for rail track, we had an easy way to set up these telegraph poles. And I just wonder if, will this technology, you know, how well integrated do we see this? And again, I just want to throw it back to, you know, Raja and or Keith to respond. But, you know, do we have can we leverage what is there now to help drive this industry forward?
You know, there is an enormous amount of investment going into the aircraft, right? And it's private investment. But if you look at the total investment dollars flowing into the rest of the ecosystem, it's very small.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that you can count, it's under $50 million, I think, nationally. And that is where the problem lies.
Yeah, yeah.
That, you know, if anybody thinks that an aircraft flies through God's air, they're smoking something. Yeah. Aviation needs aircraft and airspace is an infrastructure.
Right.
So that is, I think, where, you know, somehow we have to find some model of starting to invest in the ecosystem. You know, if vertiports can have a business model, then maybe we can get private capital to invest in vertiport development.
Right.
And that will start, you know, the other side of it.
Yeah, yeah. Keith, final thought on that?
No, I'm in agreement. It's going to require an army to get this to work, and we need support in all aspects. I think we're making a lot of progress on the technology side. I see it firsthand, and you know, I look forward to when we see broader adoption here because we're able to operate more freely.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to give the final word to Vanessa. Vanessa, everyone's talking about Joby. It's the hottest thing at the party, but what other companies do you love in 15 seconds? Any other companies that you think are awesome in this space? You don't have to answer.
really good example, but definitely, yesterday at the ASTM Autonomy Symposium, there was a speaker from Wing Copter. And so that was incredibly useful to be able to understand, what other revolutionary items are out there and how and how drones and, UAM kind of incorporate into with these vertiports and.
Yeah. Great. Oh, there's a lot. Look, I'm all for the word revolutionary here. Thank you all for a great discussion, and thank you to the Monterey Bay DART Symposium, our friends at UC Santa Cruz, everyone that made this possible. It was honor to lead the discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I just wanted to comment on the sort of last point of discussion about the investment in the technology versus the ecosystem infrastructure. I just wonder if it's, they're collectively, we were awaiting confidence in the technology before we could really think about that next step. And I think it's there. I mean, clearly the technology is there. And maybe now we're entering into that next phase of how to put together that infrastructure, I would hope.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. I mean, I hope you don't mind if I put you on the spot. I have a curiosity that I would just love to ask you from your perspective as the Vice President and publisher of Scientific American. Is there something that you've covered or read about air mobility opportunities and challenges that might stick with you that you could share with our audience? Or if not that, if there's like a take-home message you might be able to offer us and all you've sort of scanned through in your role and just.
That's a great question. Can you still hear me, by the way?
Can hear you great.
Oh,
thanks.
good. Yes. No, I mean, we have been covering science and technology, like I said, for 175 years, and it still excites me every day what we do as an organization, shining a light on how science and technology will help the planet. And when I think about, sometimes people invest in things because they're crazy cool ideas, and yet are they really helping people? And when I think about, again, the report I think I may have alluded to earlier, maybe I didn't even bring it up, but Uber Elevate did put out a report a few years ago. The average San Francisco resident spends 230 hours a year in traffic. When you think about the collective loss of productivity nationwide and then globally, I think the figure was something like $300 billion loss of productivity in traffic. So clearly we need solutions here that will help move this forward. And so it's not just the wow, gee whiz new thing about science and gadgets and early adoption that people like, but it's also about we're in this, and I give talks a lot in the health industry, in the biotech industry, and it's a lot of great technologies, but it's about people, right? It's about helping people. I know someone who says, a doctor, every data point is a human face. And I would say that same thing for any technology. We're in this obviously to bring forth new things and certainly commercialize them and scale them and democratize them. But are we solving problems? I would say absolutely. And there are tons of ways in which this technology can help humanity. So, that's what I would say about this industry. I'm not an expert in it, but when I think about it and read about it, that to me is the most essential takeaway for me.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for indulging me, and thank you so much for leading another brilliant panel session. We're so honored to have you here. We're going to move on to our second keynote speaker of the day. I am so thrilled to introduce our speaker, Director Tokes Omishakin. What another huge honor. It's such an honor to have him here with us today. Director Omishakin was appointed the 33rd Director of the Department of Transportation, also known as Caltrans, by Governor Gavin Newsom, and he was sworn in October of 2019. Director Omishakin manages a $17.3 billion budget, nearly 22,000 employees who oversee 50,000 lane miles of highway, inspect approximately 20,000 bridges, maintain 13,000 state-owned bridges, provide permitting of more than 400 public use airports, fund 3 of Amtrak's busiest intercity rail services, and provide transit support to more than 200 local and regional transit agencies. I really can't even fathom that responsibility. Director Omishakin's transportation vision for California features a safe, equitable, and sustainable and multimodal transportation system that builds on strong local partnerships. We love that. He and his leadership team established 5 priorities. I think we'll hear a little bit about some of them for the department in 2019. And in 2020, they finalized a new strategic plan, which will focus on Caltrans' foundational principles of equity, climate action, and safety. Director Omishakin, born in Knoxville, Tennessee. He is married with 2 children. He's completing his PhD in engineering management from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. He has a master's in urban and regional planning from Jackson State University and a bachelor's of art in engineering technology from Mississippi Valley State University. Wow. Well, I am just so excited to hear from you, Director Omishakin. Please, without further ado, you have the virtual floor.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks a lot for that introduction. I wish people would just skip over that sometimes and we just jump right into discussion, but really appreciate that. And I appreciate you saying that I'm a doctor already as well. I have a PhD. My family would be jumping for joy for when the day comes when I finally say I'm done and I'm not studying in the middle of the night for the PhD degree anymore. So it's good to be with everybody at the DART Symposium. This is my first time getting a chance to speak to this audience, to this group. And I can tell you, I'm probably just excited as Andrea and the rest of you to continue a collaboration between the state transportation entities, Caltrans, and the efforts of many of you listening in who are working in this DART space. You know, one of the questions that I get very often from people whenever I'm out and about or having discussions like this is, so what's your take on what the future of transportation is? What's going to happen? What does transportation look like in 10 and 20 years? And I always say it's 3 things. And these 3 things are very much connected to the work all of you are doing. Number 1, I say it's going to be multimodal. Meaning it's going to have to be diverse, kind of like the image that you see on your screen there. It's going to have to include lots of options for people to get about. Whenever we update this image, it's going to have some unmanned aircrafts in there. I only see an airplane, but so it's going to be multimodal. It's not just going to be cars on the road as we traditionally have used transportation, or trucks. It's going to be very diverse, air and land and water. Next, I say we have to invest. In maintenance and operations more than we ever have. To me, I would argue that 85% of the land, sort of major highway infrastructure that this country needs and this state needs is already built out. 85 to 95%, 90%, I would say, of that major highway infrastructure is already there. So we have to focus on investing and on maintaining and operating that existing infrastructure better. We're not going to be building giant new highways and freeways all over our communities anymore. So maintenance and operations is number 2. And number 3 on that list, what the future of transportation looks like, I always tell people is technology-based. And not just autonomous vehicles, connected and autonomous vehicles. I know that's where people's minds automatically go to, but technology in the sense of what drones can do, what robotics can do, what signals can do, better to help access for transit, for other forms of vehicles. So those 3 things, when you think about it, the work that all of you are doing very much impacts, again, in my mind, what the future of transportation is. It's going to be more multimodal. That means using our airspaces more more smartly than we are today, advancing the technology around AMS, maintaining and operating the system better. Number two, that means the more we can utilize our air safely, equitably, and in a clean manner, it's going to alleviate the pressure that we've put on our, the increasing pressure that we've put on our highway system. And number three, again, technology focused and very much drones, an AM focused approach hits very much on those things. So I'm excited about what the future holds for this industry and our work and our partnership with all of you in it. Next slide. So before I go into a little bit of more detail about AM and what our focus is and our attachment to advanced air mobility and the things happening there, I think it's important to set the stage a little bit about what we've been doing as a department over the last 2 years, and where our focus is. I overheard the last speaker before me, as you were asked that question, Andrea, I overheard him say how important what we do is for people. And I was really excited to hear him say that, because that's where we are as a department today. We're embracing this notion, this idea that even though we're an agency that's responsible for all those things that you mentioned, 50,000 miles of highways and partnering with more than 300 transit agencies, more than 250 airports, we partner with all those things. At the end of the day, all this work is about people, period. That's why we do what we do. So for an agency that's known for this massive amounts of infrastructure, to say, at the end of the day, what we really want to care about, what we care about is improving the quality of life for people, helping people achieve the goals that they want to achieve in life, and live a better life, is what we're about. I think it's a new outlook. It shouldn't be earth-shattering, but it's definitely a new outlook for an agency that's so technically inclined and focused. So we've laid out 3 guiding principles to be able to achieve those goals for people in California. Number 1, equity, climate action, and safety. From an equity standpoint, without going through a lot of detail, I know there's been a lot of discussion in many arenas about this already. But from an equity standpoint, what we're hoping is that we can help people regardless of their background, their ethnicity, their gender, their orientation, regardless of those things, their physical abilities, mental abilities, that we can help them get from place to place, whether it be to play, to work, to worship, wherever they're going, whatever they're trying to do, that we are a part of making that brighter future for them in this state. When it comes to climate action, I'll go into this a little bit more detail, but we've got tremendous challenges. As you can see, across the state, we're now averaging, over the last 3 years, we're averaging burning 2.5 million acres, 2.5 million acres, again, every single year in the state. That's more than the size of Delaware that we burn every year over the last 3 years. And finally, from a safety standpoint, our challenge there is immense. We unfortunately lose roughly 3,700 people on our transportation system every year. That's more than 10 people a day. At least 3 of those, or close to 3 of those people, are vulnerable users of the system, people who are walking, biking, and trying to get access to transit. So you think about these 3 areas again. I talked about the future of transportation in those 3 areas. These 3 areas that I just outlined here that are our pillars, the foundational principles for the department now: technology, issues around robotics, and AM, definitely help us here again as well. So I see very much a connection and a potential for us to do more as it relates to AM in our department. Next slide. So to guide this new direction, this new focus we have of those 3 foundational principles, we've put together a strategic plan. It took us about a year to finalize and complete it. We adopted it in January or February of this year. And the strategic plan is the more inwardly looking document or plan that guides how we're going to be making decisions within the department. So everything from safety, from livability and equity, efficiency, multimodal, building a more multimodal network, engagement with partners, all those things are embedded in that strategic plan. And again, guide how we do work from within the department. And then we also have the document that you're looking at on your right, CTP 2050. That's more of a 30-year document, 30-year outlook plan, sort of visioning plan for where we're going to invest in transportation and sort of the policy direction. It sets the policy direction for the state. And we developed this in conjunction with CalSTR, the California State Transportation Agency. I see a question that popped up. Normally, I can't even see these questions, but it goes into a little bit more about just in general. We'll get to questions in a second, but it goes into our role in aviation, but doesn't go into. I don't think it goes into a lot of detail on AMS or UAMs a lot, but definitely addresses aeronautics, aviation, and drones. So good early question there. So keep going. Next slide. One more book. Yeah, so Andrea in her introduction mentioned the fact that we have five priorities. These 5 priorities, I think, were very instrumental, I would say, in helping us get through some of the toughest periods this department in the state's ever faced. When I came on board in 2019, I worked with our team, our executive team, to say, okay, what are we going to focus on every day before the CTP 2050 is developed, before a strategic plan is finalized? Those things are going to take some time. It's going to take us a year plus to finalize those documents. Where do we need to pay the most attention? And these 5 things came about. And I'll tell you that through the toughest months, through the most brutal months of the pandemic and dealing with those enormous fires across the state, this outlook really saved the day for us, because we had something to latch onto and had a little bit of a North Star to get through those really difficult months in the early parts of 2020. But and it sort of led and bled into, if you will, for lack of a better term, into our strategic plan in CTP 2050. But these 5 priorities: safety, modality, having a broad modal outlook, innovation, which is what many of you here are focused on every single day, becoming more efficient, again, something that is essential to the future of the transportation system, and how UAMs and AMS can help with that, and partnership as well. The fact that we can't do this work alone within this huge department of 22,000 people. We still need partners to be able to accomplish many of the goals that we have. Next slide. The prior slide, I'm not going to go into detail on that much, because I've talked. I think most people know where we stand already. If you could go back one slide, I'll just be very brief on that. But it goes without saying, our focus can't be just on continuing to build out the highway network. I think, like I mentioned, we're mostly built out. There are some parts, urban and rural, who are still doing some efforts of building new parts of the transportation system. But I believe, as a state, the more a technology-based focus, a multimodal focus that allows people options, goods options to be able to get about, is very much the future and where we should be investing. Next slide. So part of the reason why the work that you are doing, all of you are doing, is going to be very important to the state. And I'm glad that there are so many innovators that are investing a lot of their time in the space that you all are, in the dark space that you all are working on, is because of this fact, this issue that I mentioned as one of our 3 foundational principles, and it's climate action. When you think about the challenge we have related to this area, 41% of the bad air quality, the GHG emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions in this state, comes from our sector. And a distant second at 24% is industrial pollution. I think agriculture and electricity production come in next. But that's how much of a challenge we have. Again, that prior speaker mentioned the cost of congestion, how many people are sitting in congestion, not just people, but goods as well, sitting on the back of trucks. When they're sitting there, they're in many cases, they're not electric, those vehicles, and they're emitting. And that's what you're seeing, right? The results of that. We have roughly 250,000 people in this state, 250,000, who are people who we also consider super commuters. Super commuters, if you've not heard that term before, that's people who are driving 90 minutes one way to get to work. So 250,000 people, and that list was growing. That number was growing pre-pandemic. Wonder what those numbers actually look like today, post the pandemic. But we're climbing right back to those levels, in as far as the VMT that we see on our highways again. So we've got a major challenge. And again, the work that you're doing in this DART symposium and in your different companies and organizations is going to really help us in being able to reduce this transportation challenge that we have as it relates to climate action. Next slide. So to combat this challenge, a lot of kudos is due to the administration, in particular, Governor Newsom, and how much attention he's paid to technology and electrification, electrifying the state fleet and the state highway network. So in 2 consecutive climate weeks, in September of 2019 and in September of 2020, he released executive orders 1919, I believe was in the year 2019. Executive order 7920 was in the year 2020. And executive order 1919 focused on getting us to 40% less GHG than we had in levels than we had in 1990. So getting to 40% less than the GHG levels in 1990. And that by the year 2030, we will have 5 million zero emission vehicles on our highway system as a part of the transportation system in the state. So in a mere 9 years, we're 9 years away from needing to have 5 million. And for comparison's sakes, if you're wondering, to date in California, we've sold a little over 900,000 zero emission vehicles in the state. So we're more than 4 million vehicles away from reaching that goal. Executive Order 7920 that came out in Climate Week of 2020 set the goal by the year 2035. By the year 2035, every single vehicle manufactured and sold in California should be a ZEV, a zero emission vehicle. So we're 14 years away from that, less than 14 years now, or roughly 14 years away from that goal. Every single vehicle should be electric. So a lot of challenges lay ahead for us in this particular space, but increasingly, I believe the work that's happening in the urban air mobility space and AM space will pay dividends in this growth and work as well. Next slide. To get there, I think it's one thing to put in place executive orders and policies to get to that place where we want to have more electric vehicles across the state. But you can put all the policies in place that you want to. If you don't have funding to support it, resources to support it, you just are not going to get there. And much kudos again to the administration, our partners at CARB, the California Air Resources Board, and CEC, California Energy Commission. They're responsible for this graphic that you see, but just to hone in a little bit on it so you can see exactly the numbers as far as the investment that is planned to happen. The 6th line down, CVRP, you see that line, CVRP means Clean Vehicle Rebate Program. It has a line item there of a little over $500 million, $525 million over a 3-year period. This is key because as people look to purchase electric vehicles more, this is the incentive money that's going to help people with rebates and tax incentives to purchase more electric vehicles. Over the past 10 years, this particular figure was $100 million a year, and now it's all the way to roughly $170 million over the next 3 years. So a significant increase for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program. If you're interested in this particular program, there's a little bit of a backlog. There's a 2-month backlog, but the team there is catching up. And if people apply for the CVRP program, I think within a 3-month period, they should be able to get their rebate through this program. And the next line down from that, just briefly, Clean Cars for All and Transportation Equity Program. Again, mentioned how important equity increasingly is to the state of California. A $150 million program to start this year and transitions to $125 million over the next 2 years. Overall, the investment, $2.3 billion in increase in the ZEV network, zero emission network for the state of California. Next slide. Just quickly on this, and then I think it transitions to AMS next, but here's again sort of what the ZEV market looks like for California. It's the #1 export from our state, if you didn't know that, at a value of roughly $5.6 billion for the state. So #1 valued export. Chargers being installed across the state, 73 charging locations across the state. There are 34 manufacturers in California that are creating ZEV equipment, and grants and rebates now for low income people in California now goes all the way up to nearly $10,000, $9,500 in rebates. 64 models available, and it represents ZEVs now represent 9% of the entire vehicle sale market in California today, which is pretty incredible. That nearly 10% of every vehicle sold is an electric vehicle, and most of those vehicles are more technologically advanced than the regular ICE vehicles that most of us drive. All right, next slide. Innovation, again, I mentioned this already. The work that you guys are doing in the Bay Area and other parts of the state, I think is going to be so key to the future of transportation. I call California the innovation capital of the world. And some people may argue against that, but when you think about the work you all are doing and the work that is happening in Silicon Valley related to mobility across the board, whether it be Lyft, Uber, whoever it may be, even Google, and the fact that they're in the transportation business as well, we can't help but continue to be the innovation leader. And I want Caltrans, I'm hoping our department embraces innovation more and more through partnerships with organizations like yours listening today. Next slide. Connected and autonomous vehicles. Again, I mentioned early on that it will be a significant part of the future of transportation. The growth that's happened here in this space, much of it has been led by Caltrans in California. We've been a catalyst in this space since the mid-1990s. We've helped to lead this industry, this space, and the potential here is immense. I think we have to be mindful of some possible negative impacts on other modes of transportation, but overall, they're mostly nothing but benefits that will come out of this space, and its connection again to the work that many of you are doing in the dark space is clearly there. We at Caltrans, we're developing a strategic plan on connected and autonomous vehicles. We're working with CalSTA, the DMV, and a few other state agencies to put this together. But again, it sort of outlines the future. We're hoping at least the future of connected and autonomous vehicles is with OEMs who are doing the most of the technology work across the state and across the country. Next slide. So TSMO is Transportation Systems Management and Operations. This is where, again, I think technology can play a significant role for us in the decisions we make at Caltrans on the surface transportation part. Increasingly, when you look at where the challenges are in mobility as it relates to congestion, a lot of it is not actual issues or things that are part of the system every day. There are sort of non-recurrent challenges that cause a lot of the problems that we have. So issues related to work zones, weather, accidents or crashes. That's a majority, actually, when we look at the data, a majority of the challenges we have related to congestion are in those places, are in those areas like work zones and crashes and things like that. The more we invest in technology to help us get through those sort of non-recurrent issues, I think the better off we're going to be in being efficient and delivering for people in this state. A lot of time gets spent on investing in in bottlenecks and things that are already set on the system. But again, technology is going to play a huge role in helping us to be able to get through those non-recurrent challenges. And TSMO, systems management and operations through technology, is going to be a big part of that future for us. Next slide. And again, this is what I already mentioned. I mentioned before. These are the things that are causing a lot of the challenges that we have on a transportation system. Well, some of the challenges, I should say, and issues related to incidents and weather and work zones. Those are the things that are causing a lot of challenges, and technology is going to play a key role in helping us to be able to get through, being able to get through that. Next slide. So AMS and advanced air mobility and what Caltrans is specifically doing in this space. I'll tell you, the first time that I really ever sort of paid a lot of attention to the potential here and the future that this space holds, this part of the transportation industry holds, was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, when many of you probably saw this same episode, the episode of 60 Minutes, where Jeff Bezos came out and said they were going to start using drones to help deliver packages. And drones obviously have been around for years, several years before that. But it was the first time that I started to think about, wow, there's a lot of potential. There's really a lot of potential here. He mentioned, I think at the time, he said 85% of the packages that Amazon delivers are 5 pounds or less. And that those drones would be able to, I think he said within an hour, I know they focus on on-time delivery, but he said, look, within an hour from the fulfillment centers, they'll be able to get packages to businesses or to homes wherever they were going. And I just remember sitting there watching it, being stunned, like, oh, wow, this is a game changer as far as its potential. But what was surprising to me from what he was saying, and if I'm remembering it correctly, was the 85%, the fact that 85% of the packages they deliver were 5%, weighed 5 pounds, rather, not 5%, 5 pounds or less. I know at my house, the things that my spouse orders, vacuums and all kinds of other big furniture are not 5 pounds. So, but just understanding the fact that there's so much that could be done there. And from 7 or 8 years ago, whenever that aired, to today, where there are several startups in the Bay Area who are now delivering packages, or working on, I should say, delivering packages that are, 300 to 400 pounds. I can't help but think of, again, how much potential still lies here and how much more we need to focus here. If you've been paying attention, there is to this, there's a big challenge we have going on at our ports right now in California, the Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA, which both ports account for nearly a third of all imports into this country. Those ports are backed up now with 60 to 70 ships sitting at the dock there due to challenges related to COVID. But how can this particular space, this UAM space, how can it help with that challenge? Not particularly sure, but again, the advancements we've made from when Bezos 8 years ago said, 5 pounds or less, to now some of these being able to deliver close to 100 pounds. I've seen some footage and 300 pounds worth of items. This technology, again, what you all are working on in this space, carries a lot of weight. And so I'm looking forward to what the future holds over the next 5 or 10 years for this industry. But I only have 1 or 2 minutes left here, but to talk about some of the things that we're doing very quickly, and then I'll hand back over so we can have some quick questions. Number one, we're working on a vertiport research project. If you haven't heard of a vertiport, I'm sure many of you have. It's a little different from a heliport, because we don't do any refueling, or we wouldn't do any refueling, maintenance, and repairs at vertiports. But how vertiports will work into the overall land use landscape in the state, how it will connect to other multimodal transportation options, and other ground transportation is a big part of what this research, vertiport research project is focused on. We're also doing a digitization of airspace research project, where we're engaging many of you, probably experts in the industry, on best practices and guidelines to identify processes to approve airspace corridors for more AM travel. We're working on a symposium, another symposium similar to this, with many of you industry leaders, that will happen in San Francisco at SFO in August of next year. So a little bit less than a year from now. There's a symposium called The Future of Aviation, Advanced Air Mobility symposium that's going to happen. So we're working on that particular symposium. eVTOL is something else that many of you are very familiar with, that we're focused on as well, and how that technology will continue to help us contribute to the challenges that we have in the climate action space, including issues related to improving access, noise, traffic, and other traffic related costs that we already talked about. I know Joby, I think I saw one of the speakers earlier was from Joby. They already reached out and gave a presentation to our aviation and aeronautics department in the last few months. So thanks to them for that connection and partnership. And the last slide very quickly, and I'll take some questions. I mentioned how important partnerships are to us at Caltrans. We can't achieve the things that we're hoping to achieve for the people of the state without connecting more with organizations, nonprofit, for-profit, communities, residents in this state. We can't do our work in a silo. I don't think we achieve any success by just doing the work that we do in this department. As big as it is, as influential as Caltrans is, I believe our true success comes when we create and build partnerships with organizations like yours. And so look forward to continue to engage in that. I know many of you know some of the players in our aeronautics and aviation department, they'll be glad to, and I'll be glad as well to continue to engage in this particular area, because it very much holds dividends for the future of the industry and for people. So thank you. If you're looking to reach me, my email is there, and also recently joined social media as well. So 2 ways to connect with me. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Wow, fantastic, Director Mishak, and thank you so much. It was really incredibly interesting and really exciting to hear about the future of our state's transportation system, just in general, and how it relates to air mobility. I think we're all really excited to see where that all takes us. And we're a little bit out of time, but I did want to give folks an opportunity to ask a question or two. And, one question I had with respect to that last point in partnerships, earlier in your talk, you mentioned, executive orders and policies, and the funding resources to support these orders or policies to sort of help facilitate and make those changes. And I'm wondering if you could highlight the value of partnerships, whether informal or formal, with industry with respect to your big goals and plans that you want to achieve, either in general, or maybe you could speak to the particular vertiport research project in terms of partnerships. If you could talk about sort of, what, the role of industry and maybe even academia and sort of your goals and making them and achieving them.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Andrea. So again, I don't think we can get to the place we want to get to for transportation and for livability in this space, for livability in general, if we don't partner with many of you who are listening, whether you be in a for-profit, nonprofit, a research institution. I think that growth needs to, those connections and growth, that growth needs to happen. So when you think about, for example, the climate action goal that we have, we want to see GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. We want to see that decrease across the state. We want to see vehicle miles traveled decrease across the state. But we, Caltrans, we don't own and operate trucks, for example, which is a big part of the emissions challenge that we have in California. There are some, I mentioned before that a third of the freight that ends up across the country comes from those 2 ports down in SoCal, the Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA, the 2 busiest ports in this country. When those goods come in on a ship, there's in some cases transferred to rail on the Alameda corridor. In some cases, they're transferred to the back of trucks. And those trucks sometimes are headed to warehouses within the state, and sometimes they're headed to the East Coast out of the state. We don't own those trucks. We're not the freight industry, if you will. But if we want to achieve those climate related goals, which increasingly, again, we have a lot of goods moving about on rubber wheels. That's where 90% of the freight that happens in the state still moves about via truck. If that continues to be the case, we're going to have a hard time getting there. And the turnover to going electric for those trucks, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for those trucks to become fully, those 18-wheelers to become fully electric. So sitting down with industry leaders like, again, this symposium, like this DART symposium, sitting down and engaging research institutions about how air mobility and this form of air mobility, not just airplanes, can help with goods movement throughout the state. and potentially even people movement throughout the state is going to be key. I know, for example, in LA, as we get ready for the 2028 Olympics, Uber and Hyundai have been engaged in the city of LA on how to help people move about. And I know it's still 7 years away, but how to help people move about through air taxis when the Olympic comes. But those are the kind of partnerships that we're going to continue to need from the government space, partnering again with for-profit, nonprofit entities on where are the challenges you have as it relates to congestion, to climate issues, equity issues, and trying to come up with solutions beyond the traditional solutions that we go to. The traditional solution for us is if it's congested, let's figure out how to widen the road. We can't do that anymore. Those days are gone. And that's why your efforts in this industry through the private sector or nonprofit sector are going to be so important.
Fantastic. Thank you once again, Director Omishakin. You know, we're a bit over time here, so I think we'll submit additional questions to you by email if that's okay with you. We are just so proud to have you representing and leading our state, and in particular your leadership around like people-centered and climate-centered planning. That's a really important thing to us here in the DART community, among obviously the mobility and urban air planning for the future. We really appreciate your address. Thank you so much for your time. It's really an honor to have you, and we hope to keep in communication.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Great. Well, I want to remind everyone that this afternoon we'll be down at UCSC's MBEST Research Park. That's down in Marina, a real easy location to find on the corner of Imgen Road Imgen Road and Reservation Road, right by the Marina Municipal Airport. We'll have a couple of great presentations, a little bit more about DART, and some of the texting traffic that you've seen about Uplift Central Coast, maybe Uplift California plans. And then we'll tell you a little bit about UCSC's programs that are going to be growing down at that site, and hopefully more to come on that over time in the future with this DART community. And then we'll head over to Joby Aviation for a really cool tour of what they've got going on. Remember too, we have another sort of after post hangout at the General to get to know each other a little bit better in person. This was just such a great day. It's such an honor to hear from everyone here and to be your virtual host. And do we have another slide in there? Great, thank you. So absolutely, stay connected. Remember that you can view all of these materials. If there's something you had to step away for some reason, check out what you missed online, and remember to save the date for next year. We've got one more day tomorrow coming, so don't sign off from DART yet this week. We've got a great, exciting day for you tomorrow, and for the rest of the afternoon. So thank you, and we'll see you at 2 p.m. down in Marina.